The case of Charlene Gallego. Charlene Gallego, born Charlene William, born on October 10, 1956, into a middle-class family. Parents are Mercedes and Charles. As the only child in the family, she was always pampered by her parents because of their utmost love. She excelled in school, being a clever but shy student, and showed promise as a talented violinist. However, her life took a turn for the worse during her teenage years, plagued by issues with substance abuse, drinking, and a gambling habit. By the age of 21, Charlene had been through 2 marriages and divorces and was running her own flower and glassware boutique, set up with her parents' help. She was also pursuing further education at the university. Charlene met Gerald in Sacramento, California, on September 10, 1977, just before her 21st birthday. Gerald, who was born in July 1946, was 10 years Charlene's senior and had an extensive history of crime. His upbringing was marked by instability. With his mother working as a sex worker and having multiple abusive partners, while his father, also a career criminal, was estranged from the family. Gerald's father was ultimately executed in Mississippi's gas chamber for killing 2 police officers during a prison escape. Gerald began his life of crime at a young age. By age 6, he had committed burglary and other sex crimes. At 12 years old, he was charged with lewd and lascivious acts for assaulting a 6-year-old girl. When he met Charlene, Gerald had amassed 23 arrests and had served time in prison for robbery. He had also been convicted of various other charges, including rape, incest, vehicle theft, and assaults with a deadly weapon. Gerald's first marriage was to a 21-year-old woman when he was 16. They had a daughter, Krista, who would later file charges against her father for sexual abuse in 1978. Gerald went on to marry several more times, but his relationships were short-lived due to his violent and abusive behavior. Gerald met Charlene, and they quickly formed a connection, moving in together within a week. However, Charlene soon discovered Gerald's controlling, manipulative nature. Their sex life was initially healthy, but it became a cause for concern when Gerald revealed he struggled with becoming aroused in consensual relationships. Gerald also admitted to having fantasies about non-consensual partners, which he referred to as sex slaves. To address this issue, the couple tried using role-playing, but unfortunately, this approach did not work as they had hoped. Eventually, Gerald began to devise a plan. At the time of the first murder, his girlfriend Charlene was 2 months pregnant, but she later had an abortion because Gerald did not want to be a father again. On September 11, 1978, 2 teenagers, 17-year-old Rhonda Sheff and 16-year-old Kippy Vord, disappeared from the Country Club Plaza shopping center in Sacramento. Charlene lured them into their 1973 Dodge van by offering marijuana. The girls climbed into the back of the van, where Gerald was waiting. He threatened them with a .25 caliber pistol, tied them up, and ordered Charlene to drive toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. As they went further and left the residential area, he told Charlene to stop in a remote area. He then took the girls away one at a time and sexually assaulted them. After returning to the van, Gerald told Charlene to drive to her friend's house to create an alibi, also added that she should go back by Oldsmobile. Charlene followed his instructions, and when she came back, she found Kippy and Rhonda in the van, who were then forced into the back of the vehicle. On their way back to Sacramento, Gerald had the car pulled over. He attacked both girls, knocking them unconscious with a tire iron, and then shot them in the head. Gerald and Charlene left the bodies behind and drove away. Charlene and Gerald chose to stay out of sight for a while, so they left California and temporarily moved to Reno, Nevada. Charlene's parents advised her to take her cousin's birth certificates to help Gerald get the necessary documents for work. Gerald also obtained a driver's license under the name Stephen Fail. While in Reno, the couple found regular jobs and led a normal life. They even got married during this period, but the time they do not commit a crime is only temporary. On June 24, 1979, Gerald and Charlene went to the Washoe County Fair. 14 years old, Brenda Judd and 13 years old Sandra Colley were heading home when Charlene approached them as they were leaving the fairgrounds. She asked if they would help her distribute leaflets and promised to pay them. The girls agreed and followed Charlene to her van to get more leaflets. Both girls got into the van, and shortly after, Gerald, who had been watching from a distance, came up to the vehicle. He was carrying a weapon and threatened the girls before tying them up. He then instructed Charlene to drive towards I-80 but made a stop at a hardware store first, where he picked up a hammer and a shovel. Then Charlene drove the vehicle into the hills. In the back of the van, the two young girls, Brenda and Sandra, were assaulted. Similar to the previous incident, Gerald and Charlene parked in a remote area where they let Brenda and Sandra out one at a time before killing them. Gerald then buried their bodies using a shovel he had recently bought. The next day, Charlene cleaned the van to eliminate any forensic evidence left by the victims. Gerald kept the shovel and hammer he had used, and a few months later, Gerald and Charlene returned to Sacramento. After returning to California, Gerald was eager to find another victim. They decided on the Sunrise Mall in Citrus Heights, about 20 minutes outside of Sacramento, as their next target. On April 24, 1980, they chose two 17-year-old girls, Stacy Redican and Karen Twix. Similar to their previous victims, Stacy and Karen were lured into the back of the van with the promise of drugs. Gerald, armed with a .357 Magnum, threatened and tied them up. Afterward, Stacy and Karen were taken east on I-80 and sexually assaulted during the drive. Gerald instructed Charlene to take them to Limerick Canyon, where both girls were murdered. On their way home, Charlene threw Gerald's hammer out the window. Around the same time, Charlene became pregnant again. This time, Gerald was pleased with the news, and they decided to keep the child. While on vacation in Oregon on July 7, 1980, Gerald and Charlene committed another crime. While driving on a highway, they saw 21-year-old Linda Aguila, who was pregnant and walking home from shopping. They offered her a ride, which she accepted. Charlene drove while Gerald sexually assaulted Linda in the back of the van. After finding a place to stop, Charlene got out and wandered around until Gerald was done. In a secluded area, he took Linda away from the van, hit her on the head with a rock, and strangled her to death. Linda's body was discovered later that month in a shallow grave outside Gold Beach, Oregon. Although a witness saw Linda enter unidentified van, authorities suspected her abusive boyfriend might have been behind the crime. 9 days later, Gerald and Charlene spent the evening at the Sail and Bar in West Sacramento. After the bar closed, they waited for the bartender in the parking lot, a young woman named Virginia Muchel, because Gerald was interested in her. When Virginia left work, Gerald forced her into the van at gunpoint. Not like previous times, Gerald and Charlene drove straight home instead of to a deserted area. While Gerald sexually invaded Virginia, Charlene stayed inside their house. Afterward, they drove away, and Gerald strangled Virginia. They dumped her body outside Clarksburg, where it was later discovered by law enforcement. Regular customers at the Sail and told investigators about Gerald and Charlene, who had been there the night before. Authorities were able to track them down, and Gerald admitted they were at the bar but claimed they had no knowledge of what happened to Virginia. Charlene said she and Gerald had gone fishing that day. Investigators found fishing line that had been used to tie Virginia's hands. But this evidence wasn't enough to file charges, causing the case to stall. Following this, Gerald became more violent and angry, leading to the he and Charlene separation. She then moved in with her parents. During this period, Gerald left town and started a relationship with another woman. However, by early November, he returned to Sacramento and asked to meet Charlene. She agreed, and on November 1st, they borrowed Charlene's parents' Oldsmobile and went to a bar. At the bar, Gerald expressed his desire to find another slave, and they then drove to the Arden Fair shopping center. Charlene was stunned when her husband exited the vehicle and came back with two university students, Craig Miller and Mary Sowers. They quietly got into the car as Gerald aimed a gun at them. Just as they were about to drive off, a friend of Craig noticed them and asked what was happening. Without thinking, Charlene drove out of her parking spot and sped away. Meanwhile, Craig's friend quickly noted the license plate numbers and reported the situation to the police. Charlene drove Craig and Mary into El Dorado County until Gerald told her to stop. He then forced Craig out of the car and shot him 3 times in the head. When returning to Oldsmobile, Gerald had Charlene drive them to his home, where he took Mary into the bedroom and sexually assaulted her. Later, Charlene drove them to a secluded area, where Mary was killed. The next day, when Gerald and Charlene returned to Charlene's parents' house, they found out that the police were already informed about the situation. Gerald left Charlene to face the police alone. Charlene told investigators that she and Charlene had gone to a movie in his red Triumph, but investigators were informed that the car had not moved all night. She then claimed she couldn't remember the details because she had been drinking. Meanwhile, Gerald decided he needed to move Craig's body, but it had already been discovered near Bass Lake, California. Likely in a panic, Gerald and Charlene decided to flee the state. They drove to Reno, abandoned their car, and took a bus to Salt Lake City, Utah. Back in Sacramento, Craig's friend identified Gerald from a photo taken, and Charlene's parents confirmed their son-in-law's identity, Gerald. Detectives also found that the bullets recovered from Craig's body matched those that Gerald had fired into the ceiling at his workplace. In Utah, Charlene contacted her parents for money, and they sent her money, Mercedes and Charles. Gerald and Charlene then moved to Denver, Colorado, and later to Omaha, Nebraska, where they her parents for more money. They agreed to help again but informed the FBI about the situation. The FBI was waiting for the couple at a Western Union office, where they were arrested without any issues. After being returned to California, both Gerald and Charlene pleaded not guilty. Charlene's lawyers successfully negotiated a plea deal for her. By pleading guilty to the first-degree murders of Craig, Mary, and providing testimony against Gerald, she would receive a prison sentence of just 16.5 years. Avoiding the death penalty. Charlene agreed to this deal and shared everything she knew with law enforcement. In Nevada, she also pleaded guilty to the second-degree murders of Karen and Stacy through a similar arrangement. Although California sought to overturn Charlene's plea bargain due to dissatisfaction with sentence, the charges related to the murders of Craig and Mary were dropped entirely in 1983. During her testimony, Charlene stated that she participated in the crimes because she was afraid of Gerald, describing him as violent and abusive. She claimed that he took all the money she earned and manipulated her whenever she expressed dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, Gerald tried to discredit Charlene by revealing her affair with a man other. He also labeled her as a drug addict. Gerald took the stand and gave testimony, but he revealed many inconsistencies in his testimony. He ultimately urged the jury to trust him, but they were not persuaded. As a result, Gerald Gallego was sentenced to death for the murders of Craig Miller and Mary Sowers, which occurred on June 21, 1983. He was also found guilty of the murders of Karen Twiggs and Stacy Redigan. While the remains of Brenda and Sandra were discovered in Lassen County, California, he was not tried for those deaths. Gerald maintained his innocence throughout and spent a quiet life in prison until he died from cancer in 2002 at the age of 56, while still awaiting execution. In July 1997, Charlene was released from prison. While incarcerated, she gave birth to her son, also named Gerald, who was raised by her parents. Tragically, he later died while serving in the military. After her release, Charlene chose not to return to Sacramento and started using her maiden name. She has reportedly returned to the area under the name Mary Martinez and currently works for In Charity. The case of Joseph Dowse. Joseph Dowse was born on April 13, 1945, into a poor Catholic family in St. Truden, Belgium. As a child, he enjoyed studying languages and religion. After completing his military service, he moved to France in 1964. In 1967, Joseph became a Protestant and later went to Switzerland to study to become a pastor. From 1970 to 1974, he served in parishes in Lens and Bethune. Unlike many others during that time, especially those in religious roles, Joseph knew he was gay and he accepted it. He sought to understand his feelings better and to learn about the LGBTQ community. This interest led him to study psychology and sexology, with the aspiration of eventually establishing a center to support sexual minorities. Between 1974 and 1976, Joseph researched the pastoral and psychological needs of sexual minorities at the Free University of Amsterdam. His studies received partial financial support from a church grant. After completing his studies, Joseph relocated to Paris and established the Center to Christ Libertar, CCL, inside a theater that primarily screened pornographic films. This choice was influenced by the cultural attitudes of the time, which marginalized the LGBTQ+ community and limited Joseph's options for setting up his center. At the CCL, Joseph was able to connect with wealthy and professional individuals who helped him relocate the center to a better facility. The CCL published a small magazine titled He Liberates, He Loved, and created a publishing branch that produced numerous books on complex topics, including transgender issues, sadomasochism, and controversial subjects like pedophilia. Joseph performed the blessing ceremony for all the couples, which made him and CCL became a controversial topic at that time. In 1982, Joseph became a French citizen and, along with the CCL, helped establish the International Gay Association. Through his wide network of supporters, he learned about the AIDS outbreak and became one of the first educators on the topic in Paris. In the late 1980s, he and his partner, Guy Bonda, opened a bookstore in the city center that offered literature in multiple languages, often addressing sensitive issues and presenting diverse perspectives. A bookstore employee recalled an incident where a large stone was thrown through the door's window, which was perceived as a warning. On July 19, 1990, around 9 p.m., two men claiming to be police officers knocked on Joseph's door. They requested that he go with them. They also assures Guy that Joseph will be back in about 30 minutes. However, Joseph never returned home. After 24 hours without news, Guy contacted the authorities. For days later, he officially reported Joseph missing, stating that Joseph had been taken by men who were posing as police. 3 months later, a mushroom hunter found Joseph's remains in the Rambouillet forest, located 16 miles southwest of Paris. The body was so decomposed that it was nearly unrecognizable. An autopsy indicated that Joseph had likely been strangled just hours after his last sighting by Guy. Joseph's murder remains unsolved and has led to a lot of speculation. At the time, there were rumors suggesting he was killed because he had information about high-ranking officials involved in pedophilia. It was later revealed that he was being monitored by the DCRG, the intelligence agency in France during that period. The DCRG believed that Joseph was running a pedophile ring from his bookshop, as he hosted a support group for pedophiles every Sunday evening. The primary suspect in Joseph's case is Jean-Marc Dufour, an officer from DCRG who was responsible for the surveillance. After Joseph's body was found, he and his 4 team members were questioned. Guy recognized Jean as a man who had visited their home in June 1990. At that time, he and another person appeared to be drunk, acting inappropriately, and making a lot of noise. They also continuously knocked on Joseph's door on the night he went missing. Although Jean and his team were nearby meeting an informant, but investigators could not establish any evidence linking them to Joseph's disappearance. There are speculations that the group aimed to scare Joseph, but things went too far. However, there is no evidence to clarify what happened to Joseph in 1991. Jean was dismissed from the DCRG after he shot angrily at the door of an informant, a gay man and illustrator he had previously tried to recruit for the CCL. 7 years later, 2 senior police officials faced trial for wiretapping Joseph's phone from July 12 to July 30, 1990. In 2007, Joseph's case was officially closed, leaving his murder unsolved. The case of Magali Part. Magali Bertrand was born on January 17, 1982, to Eric Bertrand, a truck driver, and Evelyn, a homemaker. She was the oldest of 5 siblings and grew up in the town of Lancrans. When she was 12, her parents divorced in 1994, and her father moved to Switzerland to start a new life with another family. Despite maintaining a close relationship with him, Magali decided to stay with her mother in France, as she was affected by the divorce. On July 12, 1998, 16-years-old Magali met 23-years-old Jeffrey Parts. Jeffrey had a miserable childhood. He grew up in an abusive home with an alcoholic father, Patrick, and he spent part of his childhood in foster care. As an adult, Jeffrey had reconciled with his father and forgiven him. Soon after they met, Jeffrey had spent a few days in prison because his ex-girlfriend accused him of domestic violence. When Magali's mother learned about Jeffrey's past, she disapproved of him. This led to a conflict between Magali and her mother, led Magali to move in with her father. There, she found a job as a care worker in a retirement home. In 2000, when 18-years-old Magali, she married Jeffrey. They moved to the town of Ornix, where Magali found a job at a DIY store, while Jeffrey worked as a painter and decorator. On March 26, 2001, Magali prepared breakfast for Jeffrey before he left for work. While they were eating, Magali mentioned that she intended to walk their Rottweiler puppy to a convenience store to buy cigarettes. The store was just a 2.5-mile round trip. However, when Jeffrey returned home from work at 4:30 p.m., he found that neither Magali nor their puppy was there. The kitchen was still messy from when Magali made breakfast, which was unusual because she usually kept things tidy. Worried, Jeffrey contacted Magali's parents, but they hadn't seen her either. By 5 p.m., he went to her workplace and discovered that she hadn't shown up for her afternoon shift and had not reported in sick. Jeffrey went to the police station to report his wife as missing. After that, he returned home and enlisted the help of a friend with an ATV to search for Magali. They called off the search around 5 a.m. so they could get some sleep. Later that morning, around 11 a.m., a young man who was picking mushrooms near his uncle's farm found a woman's body. She was partially undressed and had been burned. At first, he thought it was a mannequin that someone had discarded, but as he got closer, he realized that he was wrong. He quickly ran to his uncle's farm, and they called the authorities. Investigators were able to identify the body as 19-years-old Magali Part using a report filed by Jeffrey and some jewelry that had the couple's names and wedding date engraved on it. Near the body, they also found a cigarette butt, a knife with its blade stuck in a tree, and a wrapper from a chocolate bar. They found a jerry can filled with petrol 300 meters away. An analysis of a cigarette butt found at the scene indicated that it was a Moroccan brand sold exclusively in Switzerland. Importantly, detectives discovered no evidence of a fire where Magali's body was recovered, which led them to believe that she was murdered elsewhere and her body was later dumped in the woods. Magali's autopsy was performed on March 28, 2 days after her disappearance. She had been beaten, suffering 12 fractures throughout her body, and then burned, which made it impossible for the medical examiner to determine her exact time of death. Additionally, the official cause of Magali's death has never been made public. The medical examiner found sperm inside the body Magali's, indicating she had sexual intercourse about 48 hours before her death. However, there was no evidence of sexual assault. The examiner also detected a prescription medication for anxiety in her bloodstream, which neither Jeffrey nor Magali's family knew she was taking. Investigators could not locate a prescription for this medication in her name. Additionally, DNA analysis of a cigarette but found at the scene revealed it belonged to Magali, even though she did not smoke that brand. Detectives concluded that the cigarette was discarded after her death. This makes this information more confusing. Law enforcement began to suspect that the scene might have been staged. None of Magali's belongings were ever found. However, the Rottweiler puppy was found safe but hungry in a town called Kozy, which is about 5.5 miles from Onyx. Despite the rain that occurred between the 26th and the 28th, the puppy was clean and dry. The puzzling thing was that the dog smelled of Magali's perfume, but its leash was lost and never found. Although the puppy may have been in contact with the suspect, but the police did not take her in for forensic examination and instead returned her to Jeffrey. Investigators traced Magali's last movements and discovered that the day before her death, she had spent time with her husband and 2 friends. One of these friends informed the authorities that Magali had mentioned receiving lingerie from Jeffrey's father as a birthday gift that year. At 10 p.m. that day, Magali checked her voicemail and then turned off her phone. Early the next morning, at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., the uncle of the man who found her body remembered that his dogs had been barking for a long time, which might indicate they sensed someone in the woods. For his part, Patrick never seems to mention that he gave lingerie to his daughter-in-law, Magali. Patrick claims he went to the couple's house at 10 a.m. on the 26th, the day Magali went missing, to collect the mail, and he stated that she was not there. It is still unclear why Patrick's letter was at Magali's house. On the afternoon of the 26th, in Saint-Genis-Pau, someone attempted to withdraw about 400 euros from an ATM using Magali's credit cards but failed due to an incorrect PIN. This person also had Jeffrey's credit card and successfully withdrew 35 euros, suggesting they knew his PIN. 3 eyewitnesses confirmed that they saw Magali in the same town on the day she died, between 9:30 and 11 a.m. Her family is puzzled about how and why she was there, as it would have been a long walk for her to get cigarettes. Magali, who was 19, and her husband did not have a car. However, all the eyewitnesses admitted they could not be completely certain that the woman they saw was indeed Magali. Magali's case has been covered by the media very little over the years. The lack of progress in the investigation has left her family feeling frustrated, and they have often expressed their pain to the media. Since the murder happened near the Swiss border, journalists in Switzerland began to take an interest in the case. They uncovered multiple shortcomings in the police investigation, including the loss of DNA, which was later recovered, as well as the disappearance of photographs of tire tracks found at the crime scene. Additionally, the police were so convinced that Magali was the victim of a random attack, they did not pursue further leads. The attack was very violent, indicating that the perpetrator had a lot of anger towards Magali. However, the police did not thoroughly question her colleagues, friends, and family, nor did they examine their cars. Law enforcement also thought that eyewitnesses had seen Magali in another town that day, leading them to strongly believe she had gone missing at the time she was last seen. Consequently, again, they did not investigate other hypotheses. Magali's husband, Jeffrey, was cleared as a suspect due to his alibi. In 2004, 3 years after her death, it was revealed that in the months before the crime, she had missed work multiple times, but Jeffrey and other family members were not aware of this. 2 years later, Jeffrey and Patrick were held in police custody for questioning but were released because there was no evidence connecting them to the crime. Jeffrey has reportedly mentioned that he has an idea of who the attacker might be, but he has never revealed their identity publicly. His father, Patrick, who was questioned due to the lingerie incident, stated that he was at home when Magali disappeared. But the reliability of this remains unclear. There have been very few updates in Magali's case over the years. In 2015, her father, Eric, raised funds to hire a private investigator. The investigator confirmed what journalists had already reported, that the police made several mistakes during the initial investigation and they may have overlooked important information. In 2016, Magali's body was exhumed for further examination, but the results were unhelpful. After Magali's passing, her husband, Jeffrey, remarried and had 4 children with his new wife. Tragically, he ended his life on September 15, 2018. Magali's parents are not sure why he did that, whether it was due to guilt or sorrow over Magali's death. Jeffrey's suicide note did not mention Magali, but his new wife stated that the murder weighed heavily on their marriage throughout. In 2020, investigators re-examined the cigarette but found that the crime scene and discovered fingerprints on it that did not match either Jeffrey or his father Patrick. The case of Richard Beasley. Richard Beasley, born in 1959, was from Akron, Ohio. He was mainly raised by his mother, who worked as an office worker. After finishing school, Richard became a mechanic. He had a criminal history that included a 5-year prison sentence in Texas for burglary, followed by 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio under a new identity and tried to create a positive image by pretending to be a pastor and attending church regularly. During this time, he developed a drug addiction. Eventually, after being involved in a car accident, he stopped working and lost his source of income. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone Richard knew from the motorcycle network. Richard decided to mentor Brogan, discussing the value of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his moral conversations, Richard was actually living a double life. He had found an apartment near the road, where he sought search for girls in need, homeless people, and drug addicts for trafficking. The police eventually discovered his actions, forcing Richard to change his identity once more. As a result, he shifted his focus to exploit homeless and unemployed individuals, intending to steal their money and personal information. Noble County, located in southeastern Ohio, is a sparsely populated area characterized by vast, deserted forests. It was here that Scott Davis, a 48-year-old man, relocated from South Carolina after having worked in the state for about 15 years. To seeking better opportunities, Scott made the move to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. Scott came across a job posting on Craigslist that caught his attention. The job description read, "Simply care for a 688-acre property and raise cattle." The position pays $1,300 a week and have the opportunity to live a beautiful 2-bedroom mobile home. Although older and single individuals are preferred, but all qualified individuals will be considered. This is a short-term opportunity, so call now to apply. The benefits highlighted in the listing appealed to Scott, who was desperate for a job, and he decided to contact the employer early. After Scott heard back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the job ad, he was quickly accepted for the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta. At the restaurant, Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi, who both appeared to be genuine farmers. Their trustworthy appearance made Scott feel at ease. Then, Richard conducted an initial interview and asked Scott to join him in the car to visit the job site. They drove to a remote forest area with no cell phone reception. Suddenly, Richard said to Brogan, who was driving, that "Can they stop here? He need to grab some equipment for the farm, near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott got out of the car. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest, with Richard following behind Scott. As they walked, Scott heard a clicking sound behind him, followed by some mumbling. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood he was the target next in line. Just as Richard was about to pull the trigger, Scott swiftly pushed the gun away, and the bullet struck his elbow instead. Scott then took off running, and Richard chased him, gunfire ringing in his ears, with bullets whizzing past and the sound of breaking trees and branches behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the barrel of the revolver aimed at him. Stunned and terrified, he froze momentarily before he sprinted away. Scott was lost and unfamiliar with his surroundings, but that didn't matter to him. All that mattered was making his escape. Richard, the gunman, shot at him as he fled, hitting him in the arm and making him fall. Just as Richard was about to take another shot, Scott, despite his injury, got back on his feet and ran, with blood pouring from his wounded arm. Hoping to escape the gunfire, Scott hurried to his right and slipped between two large trees. He started descending a small, slippery slope, almost losing his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. As he slid down, he flailed his arms to keep his balance, unaware of the pain from his gunshot wound. He knew he couldn't afford to fall. If he did, his chances of survival would vanish. Then, he began to run once more. He heard the gunfire of the revolver right behind him for the second time. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away, causing a rush of air. "Oh God, he's not going to let me live," he thought again. Scott took refuge in a thicket of brambles and underbrush, ignoring the thorns and hooks that tore at his skin, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His only focus was to escape the maniac with the gun, Richard. Another gunshot echoed, startling him and led him to run even faster. His heart raced, his ears buzzed from the noise, and he shook from the sweat that drenched him. When Scott finally broke free from the thick undergrowth, he paused briefly. He felt disoriented, unsure of his next steps. All around him was dense vegetation, trees, bushes, and bare branches, and the murderer was still pursuing him. He could hear the sounds of someone crashing through the brush he had just escaped, and he realized he couldn't afford to stop. He needed to continue running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard his attacker getting closer, followed by the sound of a gunshot. He realized he was nearing his end, and the thought filled him with dread. He sprinted faster, but stumbled and fell, sweat stinging his eyes and obscuring his vision. His head spun, and all he could hear was a deafening ringing in his ears. Then, he struggled to keep running. His heart raced as if it would explode from his chest, and he finally stopped. He spotted a small ditch surrounded by thick plants and scattered fallen branches. He quickly ducked behind a large tree, straining to listen for the gunman. Scott could sense the fear radiating from himself as he groaned softly. He noticed that his arm was bleeding heavily, yet he didn't feel any pain at that moment. As his heartbeat began to stabilize, his hearing returned to normal. He could hear dogs barking in the distance and crows cawing from nearby trees. He listened carefully, hoping to detect if anyone was following or searching for him, but the forest was unusually quiet. Hiding there, he felt a mix of shock, pain, and trembling fear. Eventually, he became convinced that he had escaped his attacker, and he felt immense relief. Even after he was certain the murderer was leave, Scott needed 7 more hours to feel safe enough to seek help. When he found the chance to escape, he located a house and called the police. Noble County detectives arrived about 15 minutes later, and Scott told the officer everything, tell about Richard and the chase. Remarkably, he survived an 8-hour pursuit. Unfortunately, not all victims were as fortunate. Scott wasn't the first person to respond to that job posting. In fact, hundreds of people had applied and been accepted over the months before Scott's incident. After Scott escaped a life-threatening situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he had met Richard and Brogan. However, they faced a setback. A fire in the surveillance room the night before had damaged the recordings, making recovery difficult and time-consuming. Meanwhile, the media reported on a man who posted fake job ads on Craigslist to lure victims into the woods, where he killed them. The shocking story has garnered widespread attention of many. In August 2011, 56-year-old Ralph Geiger was experiencing a difficult period in his life. He was unemployed and living in a homeless shelter in Akron, Ohio. After losing his job, he faced significant challenges. Ralph had graduated high school in the 1970s and moved to California, where he worked with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and successfully started his own business, where he was able to hire employees and make a living by renovating homes and taking on various jobs. However, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he could no longer afford his rent, leading to his move into a homeless shelter. He lost his apartment and faced many hardships. Ralph was a lifelong bachelor, which meant he didn't have to worry about supporting a wife and children. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who is 26 and considers him like a father, often mentioned this about him. They developed a strong bond after he hired her to help clean his house many years ago. Ralph was known for his willingness to assist friends. In the summer of 2011, he visited the library every day to search for job opportunities. By the end of July, he excitedly told Summer he had landed a great job managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job not only provided him with a free mobile home but also a salary of $300 a week. Summer was thrilled for Ralph, believing he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph was happy and saw the job as an opportunity to regain his independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and said him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without hearing from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to reach him multiple times on his mobile phone, but each time, she only got his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. When she called the number again, someone else answered, indicating that Ralph's number had been reassigned. Despite her worries about Ralph, Summer chose not to report him missing, as she wasn't certain he was actually gone. Ralph had disappeared in the past, but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauly, who have had a hard time in recent years. His divorce 2 years earlier had left him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting over in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After the divorce, David found comfort in using the computer and often browsed the web. One night in October 2011, he came across a Craigslist ad that piqued his interest. He discovered a job advertisement in the Help Wanted section for a farm caretaker position on a 688-acre farm located in rural Ohio. The job pays $1,300 a week and includes free use of a trailer on the property. Curious and excited about this opportunity, David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, thought that taking a break from the city would be a significant change. Rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, felt like a promising option for the change he desired. The fact that he would have a free place to stay would also help him save money. David decided to respond to the advertisement and soon received a reply. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, frequently communicated with him. On October 22, 2011, she received a call from him while he was staying Red Roof Inn, Parkersburg, West Virginia, on his way to Ohio. David was very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He spoke about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life there. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David talked for a bit, with Deborah wishing her younger brother good luck and reminding him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, they had no idea it would be their last conversation. David's sister, unable to reach him for some time, saw news reports and contacted the police. They quickly realized that David was yet another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest where Richard had tried to murder Scott. After searching for 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and nearby, they discovered a grave that had been dug in advance for Scott. A K-9 unit was called in, and soon after, they noticed something unusual. They uncovered another body buried in the damp soil, which had been shot in the back of the head. This body was identified as David Pauly. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave containing an unidentified body. The sheriff's office in Noble County requested assistance from the FBI to track down the person who had posted a job advertisement related to the case. They needed the FBI to trace the poster using the IP address and the details of the advertisement. It became apparent that the advertiser was searching for a particular individual, someone who could vanish without attracting much attention or concern. During the interview, Richard would not hire applicants mentioned they were married or had combat or martial arts skills. He was specifically seeking older men for the position. Additionally, he completely ignored responses from women who applied. The candidates who met his criteria were Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis. Another suitable applicant was Timothy Kern, who is 47 years old. Timothy Kern was a divorced father and living away from his 3 sons. To take a job in Ohio, he had to leave his children at home. He responded to a job advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after an incident involving Scott Davis. On November 12th, Timothy visited his sons to say goodbye before moving to Ohio. After he left, there was no further communication from him, which triggered the start of an investigation into his disappearance. About 2 weeks later, the FBI found that the IP address of the person who posted the advertisement was linked to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. He claimed he had not posted any ads on Craigslist and did not know anyone named Richard, but he did mention that a man had rented a room in his house. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner and recognized a man named Richard Beasley, who is a local from Noble. When Joe viewed the footage, he identified the man, but Richard had previously introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. Police had no idea they had found Ralph Geiger, Richard Beasley's first victim, buried in an unmarked grave. They also found Brogan Rafferty, Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken into custody. Brogan agreed to share all the details of Richard's actions and to testify in court in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was also present when Richard brought Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, where Richard later lured David and Scott. Brogan wrote a report of the incident and said that they led Ralph into the woods on a hot summer night. He recalled hearing a loud noise and then going back to the car to get a shovel. When he returned, Ralph was still there, and Richard had thrown Ralph's clothes into a trash bag along with some personal belongings. Brogan also described digging a hole that was waist-high and probably about 4 feet wide. They struggled to place Ralph's body in it and sprinkled lime over him as a baptismal ritual. After Richard stole Ralph Geiger's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He then found a job and took pleasure in his actions. Many victims arrived with most of their belongings in their cars, which Richard later sold. Scott Davis informed Richard that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview, and Richard was excited about that. The last victim of Richard was Timothy Kern. At 47 years old, he faced similar job struggles as the other victims. While looking for a new job, he found a promising opportunity that required him to relocate. However, Timothy was reluctant to move away from his children. Since his divorce in 1997, he had remained close to his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. He was not only a dedicated father but also an enthusiastic baseball coach, always making time for his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their relationships through social media, especially Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about a unique job opportunity managing a 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing that covered rent and utilities, and a generous weekly salary. His only worry was the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was concerned about being away from his family, the job was too great. He planned to move on Sunday, feeling a sense of regret about leaving his cherished children. On November 12th, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He cherished the time he spent with his sons before departing the next morning. One of his sons received a message from he, expressing his love, but no one realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different site behind an abandoned shopping center in a can. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were not initially aware of Richard's address, but they eventually apprehended him. Unbeknownst to Richard, Joe, his landlord, had talked to the police, which led them to track Richard's IP address. As a result, Richard contacted Joe both by phone and through messages, which allowed the police to locate him. Richard was arrested on November 16th, just 3 days after he killed Timothy. He faced charges for the murders of Ralph, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with various other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty were put on trial in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern. Brogan was offered a plea deal in which he would receive leniency if he provided information about Richard Beasley. However, he decided to reject the offer. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of aggravated murder. Even though Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to deny Richard's involvement when the key witness and one of the victims, Scott, agreed to testify. There was also a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including the victim's personal belongings and identification found at Richard's home. Although he tried to deny it, all the evidence proved him guilty. Richard's trial took place later that year, and he was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Police Court for resentencing, but the verdict did not change. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard participated in his sentencing via video link from the Chilo Correctional Institution. He was seated in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks. Richard's attorney argued against imposing multiple consecutive sentences on someone who was already facing the death penalty, suggesting it was unnecessary. However, Summit County Prosecutor Jacket Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should stay the same. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common Court supported the prosecutor's stance, stating that imposing multiple consecutive sentences was necessary to accurately represent Richard's criminal behavior. During the trial, Richard asked if he could get back a Celtic cross that had been seized during the investigation. He explained that the necklace had been in his family for generations and he wanted to give it to his newly married daughter. He insisted it was not related to the case, and it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It's striking that a man convicted of murdering many innocent people would present himself as a loving father. This raises questions about whether his behavior towards his daughter was truly genuine or simply a strategy to appear compassionate to the jury. Richard's mother was there, convinced of his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, Scott, and the confession of his accomplice who testified in court, Richard had to accept the consequences of his actions. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother did not speak further. Richard appealed the verdict but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has continuously claimed he is innocent, but no one believes him. He is currently at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard was close to evading capture, but his gun jammed, giving Scott the chance to escape. If Scott hadn't escaped and reported the incident, the serial killer in the woods might not have been discovered, leading to more victims. The situation began with an online job ad that the victims accepted without question. The case of Ronald Burns. Kiana was born on September 15, 1977, in St. Louis, Missouri. She graduated from Riverview Garden High School and then attended St. Louis Community College in Florissant Valley, where she studied cosmetology. After completing her education, she started her own beauty salon, which quickly became very popular. Kiana was worked hard because she dreamed of a luxurious and prosperous life. Her commitment to her business paid off. Over the next 20 years, through her determination and effort, she grew her salon into one of the largest in the St. Louis area. However, Kiana's personal life hasn't always been smooth sailing. As a strong, wealthy, and ambitious woman, she had difficulty finding a suitable life partner. Over the course of her 44 years, she became a mother to 3 children from previous relationships, whom she loves dearly. Her family sees her as a wonderful and caring mother. Kiana was also known for her ability to uplift other women, her loyalty as a friend, and her success in business. She seemed to have everything when she met her future husband, Ronald Burns. Ronald Burns was born on May 14, 1975, in St. Louis, Missouri. He graduated from the High School of Fashion in 1994, where he was a member of the basketball team and competed in the state championship. He is very ambitious, enjoys competition, and always strives for excellence. When he met Kiana, he already had 2 children from a previous relationship. Their meeting brought together 2 successful and driven individuals, and together they built a new, happy, and joyful family. On September 13, 2012, Ronald and Kiana officially married and celebrated a beautiful wedding surrounded by family and friends. However, shortly after the wedding, Kiana began to discover new aspects of her husband, Ronald. She discovered that he had committed his life to Jesus Christ at a young age and wanted to fulfill his mission to serve others. He started helping everyone he encountered, even those on the street. He also created a personal website where he began coaching and preaching, sharing that God had guided him in his early years to help people. Ronald continued his ministry, and his video messages gained significant popularity online. Besides being a church coach known for his inspiring speeches, he also worked as a financial counselor and insurance agent. He founded a company called Traditional Financial Solutions, with the goal of helping people worldwide achieve financial independence. He found great success in his business, and his speeches attracted large audiences due to his dedication to helping others. Kiana supported her husband, and together they became popular online. Ronald was already a recognized leader and coach in Six Figure Ambition, an online program for entrepreneurs. He had over 7,000 followers on Instagram and 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, where he shared educational videos. Ronald and Kiana combined their family and business skills. shared their dream and ended up creating something amazing that has impacted thousands of people. Kiana was a well-known speaker at business events, where she shared valuable lessons and inspiration for achieving success. She had 14,000 followers on Instagram, where she posted about her family life and inspirational quotes. In one of her popular video messages, Kiana and Ronald appeared together, dressed in branded clothing. They discussed entrepreneurship and how it positively impacted their lives and the lives of thousands of their followers. The couple emphasized their mission to teach their audience how to become successful entrepreneurs and establish a solid foundation for their businesses. The Burns family aimed to teach young entrepreneurs the importance of investing their earnings wisely instead of spending them all. Their message emphasized that they believe in anyone who believes in them, highlighting that you don't need to be great to begin, you just need to start to become great. Rather than hiding their luxurious lifestyle, they openly showcased it to inspire and attract new students and subscribers. In the Burns family, only Kiana has followed the path that Ronald often talks about. She has worked hard to create and manage her own network of salons. At the time, Kiana owned several salons and was also a successful insurance agent. Her business provided most of the family's income. Ronald wanted to maintain a successful image, which led to the perception of their family as wealthy, always dressed in expensive clothes. They regularly shared photos from upscale restaurants. However, true wealthy and successful individuals take action rather than just talk. Meanwhile, those less fortunate continue to believe the Burns family's speech, swayed by their stories about making money easily without hard work, relying solely on the guidance of their mentor. Ronald attracted a lot of attention because many people wanted to become rich like his family. In response, he founded a company with ambitious goals, allowing him to grow his wealth lasting, which he often discussed in interviews. The Burns family built an attached relationship, and for a long time, everyone believed in it. However, things changed when Ronald suggested that Kiana move from her cherished hometown of St. Louis to Atlanta. At that point, they had 3 children together, Rhea, Makiai, and Ray. As successful parents and professionals, Ronald and Kiana became inspirational figures admired by many. The move to Atlanta was necessary for their business expansion. Ronald, who owned his wife's salon, had big dreams of growing it beyond the 3 beauty salons they had in St. Louis. He wanted to open a chain of salons in Atlanta to reach more customers. Although initially Kiana was hesitant to leave St. Louis, she ultimately supported her husband and agreed to move to Atlanta. On social media, Kiana shared her luxurious lifestyle, posting a picture of herself receiving a luxury Maserati Levant as a gift from Ronald. She also shared images of her car trunk filled with Louis Vuitton bags, each accompanied by captions expressing her admiration and gratitude toward her husband. Kiana, like many bloggers, often shared pictures of her children and family on her Instagram. However, she eventually revealed to her followers that her family life wasn't as perfect as it appeared. It became clear that she and her husband were close to getting a divorce. After relocating to Atlanta, Kiana found herself alone in a large, unfamiliar city where she had to start all over again. In a video message to her followers, she expressed how difficult it was to make the decision to move and to adapt to a new environment and new people. She stated during a Facebook live stream that everyone had to be prepared for changes in life. Things could improve or deteriorate overnight. She added that if one didn't believe they were strong enough, certain situations could overwhelm them. She shared with her followers that she was going through a tough time and needed their support. Kiana found there to be a great source of encouragement as she faced growing challenges. Meanwhile, she and Ronald were quietly dealing with a serious problem in their relationship and were headed for divorce. This confession unsettled the subscribers, led Ronald to address the situation live on air. He disclosed that they had decided 7 months ago to divorce. He said that he was bored with her, and that they would continue to manage the business together, but they officially announced their divorce. He mentioned that they had both come to this decision, and although they would not mind it, everything around them would remain unchanged. They started by drawing a line down the middle of a piece of paper to decide how to split their business. However, bloggers typically share only positive experiences with their audience. Talking about failures and challenges can diminish their credibility, especially for the Burns family, who had spent years building their reputation. Yet, as public figures, it became evident that their wealthy lifestyle was merely a facade for social media. Ronald, in his pursuit of fame, quickly wasted all the money Kiana earned from her beauty salons. The situation worsened for the Burns family, leading to their debt exceeding $500,000 in just a few years. Their move to a new city and the financial problems they faced became too much to bear. On the night before tragic endings, Kiana went live and talked to her channel subscribers. She requested prayers for strength as she faced difficulties without the support of family or friends, especially while taking care of her children. In her post, Kiana discussed the changes in her life and explained that she and her husband had moved to Atlanta only 5 or 6 months earlier to grow their business. Kiana wanted to emphasize that if one didn't pray and maintain their faith, circumstances could shift and lead them astray. She also mentioned the importance of having a group of friends so that can discuss difficult issues together. If people rely only on luck, they can overthink things and make bad decisions. Concluding her speech, she pointed out that changes in life were often challenging, particularly when adapting to new surroundings and meeting new people. Without the support of close family and friends, it can be very challenging. Kiana acknowledged that she is focusing on her mental health and fears she may not be strong enough to face life's challenges. However, the main reason for the family imbalance was the move. During her speech, Kiana did not mention that the real cause of their issues was Ronald's repeated infidelity and promiscuous behavior, which was hidden behind the facade of their seemingly happy life on Instagram. That same night, she shared a video of herself happily dancing at home with one of her daughters. A few hours later, a tragic incident occurred. Kiana and Ronald had a lengthy argument. In a moment of despair, she took a gun and shot him, then turned the gun on herself. Authorities were called to the Burns home, and by the time the police arrived, neighbors had gathered outside, reporting that they heard gunshots from inside. Initial investigations indicated that Ronald had shot himself, but soon after, Kiana's bloody body was found in another room, a gun still in her hands. It became clear that the tragic decision was made by Kiana. While the motives were evident, some speculated that she was compelled to kill Ronald after discovering he had been unfaithful. Others suggested that the couple was deeply in debt, and that Ronald was a con artist who had betrayed her trust. Those who believe this have searched deeper into their lives and discovered some very information from Ronald's ex-wife. She stated that during her divorce, she discovered that Ronald was a habitual cheater. Throughout their marriage, he was very careless with his wife's finances and could not maintain any jobs. This eventually led to financial ruin and her credit history was affected. After they got divorced, Ronald met Kiana, a successful career woman who intrigued him. In turn, Kiana was drawn to Ronald's confidence and charm. Ronald and Kiana seemed to be a promising match, combining her financial success with his experience, but their expectations fell short, and all their business ventures ultimately failed. The only business that survived was Kiana's beauty salon. Despite not generating any income, Ronald maintained the appearance of a successful businessman. The family skillfully concealed their financial struggles on social media, frequently showcasing expensive purchases. They also hid their relationship issues by posting joyful pictures together. Ronald continued to share updates about his business projects on his account, asserting that every endeavor he undertook was successful and profitable. The Burns family portrayed themselves as Christians, often including biblical quotes in their posts. They shared images of their lavish home, highlighting their wealth and family life. However, these pictures, whether at home, at parties, in front of cars, or on vacation, serve merely as a facade. Ronald worked for an American marketing insurance company, known for exploiting middle and lower-income families. He even attempted to rope in family and friends to participate in this deceitful scheme in a bid to enhance his status. Even so, Ronald did not make enough money from this venture and struggled to support himself. Ronald and Kiana continuously convincing those around them that their new business was thriving and that they were successful entrepreneurs. Their overconfidence was evident when they even created a TV series about their lives, titled Meet the Burns. Despite their claims of success, they quickly spent all their earnings on an extravagant lifestyle, trying to project an image that didn't reflect reality. This reckless spending ultimately led to their financial downfall. On December 19, 2019, Kiana and Ronald officially filed for bankruptcy, requiring them to sell some of their assets to settle their debts. Despite all this, Ronald and Kiana continued as if nothing had happened, maintaining the facade of a happy family and successful business people. However, in St. Louis, it was becoming harder to maintain that illusion. Ronald resolved that they should relocate to a larger city to continue their schemes without consequences. This turned out to be another poor decision on his part. Kiana's beauty salon is still profitable for them, which was their family's only source of income. Sadly, Kiana went along with her husband's plan and agreed to the move once more. Kiana struggled to adjust to life new in Atlanta. She was already aware that her husband had cheated on her multiple times and was exhausted from being patient and quiet about it. They agreed to divorce, but when Ronald filed the papers on October 10, 2021, he claimed Kiana's infidelity as the reason for their separation. Kiana was heartbroken, but she understood reasons, as her family and friends were unaware of the issues between her and Ronald. He concealed the truth from everyone to maintain his reputation. On October 20th, just 10 days after filing for divorce, Kiana appeared on live television to address a more serious matter. Her usual bright smile was replaced by a look of concern and sorrow. After his divorce from his first wife, Ronald had married the successful and wealthy Kiana. Presenting himself as a devoted guru, he appeared reformed and trustworthy. However, he had not truly changed and continued to exploit Kiana's trust and wealth while pretending to be a successful businessman. On November 9, 2021, what appeared to be a happy marriage ended tragically when 44 years old Kiana Burns shot and killed her husband, 46 years old Ronald Burns, before turning the gun on herself. They left behind 8 children who will now grow up without their parents. According to the Sandy Springs Police Department, there was no history of domestic violence in their household. Just weeks prior to this tragedy, Kiana had asked her friends on Facebook for prayers. But the reasons behind her actions remain unclear, leaving many to wonder what could have led to such a drastic decision. It can be challenging to understand the actions of someone struggling with depression and other serious mental health issues. Furthermore, it is especially concerning to witness their children having to fend for themselves without their parents. The news of Ronald and his wife Kiana's deaths has spread quickly among their many friends and colleagues. Their passing has drawn considerable attention on social media, with many friends and followers sharing their grief and fond memories of the couple. Those who knew them best have paid tribute, yet a post from a family friend reveals that even people very close to the couple were unaware of the family's true situation until the end. Ronald had a tendency to show off his success and luxury. He became so absorbed in his self-image that he confused self-worth with self-importance. Like a destructive force, he disrupted the lives of several hard-working and successful women. He is merely a deceitful con man who brought his wives down. He misled women into believing in wonderful dreams of happiness and success that they would only achieve with him. The case of Alicia Canales McGuire. Alicia Canales McGuire was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. Growing up on a farm, she learned the value of hard work and often returned to her family's farm to help. Spending time with loved ones is essential to Alicia. She talks to them often. Alicia lives in Birdsview with her husband Bradley, whom she married in a beach ceremony at Deception Pass in July 2017. She had just gotten married 2 months ago, and Alicia is excited about having her own family. Her sister, Amanda Canales, who has 3 children, is about to go on a business trip to New York and asks Alicia to babysit while she is away. Alicia happily agrees because she loves her nieces and nephews. Alicia has been taking care of her grandchildren with an in-house nanny. When the nanny heard the gunshots, she rushed to check. She found Alicia dead at the door. The nanny immediately called 911, asking for help. When the police arrived, they began searching the house to make sure the perpetrator was no longer inside. The police verified that only the nanny and Amanda's children were present. After the children were safely removed from the house, the police began collecting evidence. A car was parked in front of the house near where Alicia was shot, with shell casings nearby, indicating that the shooter had been next to the car, near the front door. Several bullets were lodged in the door frame, and Alicia's body was lying face down outside the door. The crime did not appear to be a robbery, as the house was undisturbed and there were no signs of forced entry. This led the police to wonder who might have wanted to kill Alicia and why. However, police attention was diverted when they learned that the house belonged to Alicia's sister, Amanda. They began to consider the possibility of mistaken identity, suspecting that Amanda might have been the intended target. But Amanda was in New York at the time of the shooting. The nanny, who was in the house when the shooting occurred, was questioned by police. They asked her if she had seen the shooter or knew anyone who might have wanted to harm Alicia. The nanny reported that she was upstairs when she heard the gunshots. When she ran downstairs, she found Alicia lying face down and unconscious on the floor. Unfortunately, the nanny did not see the shooter. Alicia's acquaintances told the police that Alicia seemed to get along well with her husband, Bradley. However, she gave the police a crucial clue when she mentioned that Alicia's sister, Amanda, was having problems with her ex-husband, Kevin Lewis. After reviewing reports from the local sheriff's office, the police discovered that they had been called to Amanda and Kevin's address several times before, all in connection with domestic disputes. The police found this information particularly interesting and decided to investigate further. Before dawn, they visited Kevin at his home in another part of Everett. When they knocked on the door, Kevin opened the door, looking as if he had just woken up. During the conversation, the officers asked Kevin if he knew where Amanda was, and he replied that she should be home. The police questioned Kevin about his whereabouts the night before. He claimed to have gone home, saying that his sister and mother would confirm his alibi. He did not ask why the police were there. When they told him that there had been a shooting in the house where his children lived, he showed no emotion, which was unusual for a father. He should have asked if his children were okay, but he did not. When the police told him that Amanda was away on business, Kevin appeared genuinely surprised, exclaiming, "Really?" and ending the conversation. As they left, the police discovered surveillance cameras at 2 nearby homes that could help corroborate Kevin's story. After reviewing the footage, the police discovered a car parked near Kevin's driveway about 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia. The footage showed someone resembling Kevin walking out the front door, getting into the car, and driving away, contradicting Kevin's claim that he had been home all night. The recording was not clear enough to confirm the identity of the person as Kevin. To gather more information, the police reviewed footage from another camera, which gave them a closer look at the car, but did not help identify it. All they could see was that it was a light-colored car. They fast-forwarded the footage and saw the car return about 20 minutes later. However, They now noticed a crucial detail. The right front tire of this car was different from the other three. The three tires were light-colored, while the right front tire was dark. The car stopped near Kevin's house, and the same person seen in the first footage got out of the car and walked back to the house. Whoever this man was, he had entered the house about 20 minutes before the 911 call about a shooting started coming in. The car then drove away and never returned. It was a 15-minute drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's, meaning the car had enough time to get to Amanda's house, or it may not have been involved in the shooting. Amanda first learned of younger sister Alicia's death when her father called her, just hours after the tragedy. Amanda was in New York at the time, away from her family. Alicia's death was especially devastating, as she had recently married and was looking forward to starting a family of her own. When police questioned Amanda about potential suspects, she immediately pointed to her ex-husband Kevin as the likely culprit. During their 8 years together, Amanda endured physical abuse, leaving her bruised. Even after their divorce in June 2017, Kevin's behavior did not change. He continued to threaten Amanda, causing her to fear for her safety. Following a court ruling in August 2017, Amanda was awarded full custody of their 3 young children. The court ordered Kevin to pay $800 a month. This marked a new beginning for Amanda, as she rebuilt her life in Everett, Washington. Surrounded by the love and support of her family, Amanda overcame the challenges of being a single mother. Kevin threatened Amanda, saying he would kill her. As a former soldier, he had been trained. Amanda believed she was the target of the attack, but younger sister died. She even obtained a restraining order against Kevin, but he violated the order several times. Kevin frequently loitered outside her home, peering through windows and instilling fear in Amanda and her 3 children. Although he ignored the restraining order, he was never charged by the police. In one particularly disturbing incident just weeks before her sister was murdered, Amanda was brutally beaten as she got out of her car. She was returning home late at night and had parked in the driveway next to her house. She didn't see the attacker's face because the attack happened so suddenly, but she was certain Kevin was the culprit. Kevin Lewis, 30, was initially the prime suspect in the death of Alicia Canales-McGuire. Police believed he was targeting his ex-wife. However, Kevin did not know Amanda was in New York, nor did he know Alicia was babysitting Amanda's children while she was away. Police found discrepancies. If the person in the video was indeed Kevin, he would have been home during the entire time of the shooting. Furthermore, his sister and mother had provided Kevin with a solid alibi. Therefore, the police continued to investigate and look into what happened. Upon returning to Amanda's home, the police re-examined the crime scene. Ballistics experts determined that Alicia was shot with the door partially open. The shooter fired at least 7 shots from outside the house, then fired inside. Evidence at the crime scene showed that the shooter fired multiple shots while standing next to the garage, then moved toward the door and fired again from inside. Alicia's autopsy revealed that she died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso, with a total of 5 shots hitting her. 2 of the shots caused gunpowder wounds, suggesting they were fired at close range. Although the medical examiner was unable to determine the exact order of the shots, it is believed that the 2 head wounds may have been the final shots. Forensic analysis confirmed that all 7 shell casings found at the scene came from the same type of gun. The wounds to Alicia's head were consistent with shots fired at close range. The shell casings found at the crime scene also caught the attention of police because the type of shell casing was uncommon. It was a Russian-made shell casing under the brand name Telamo. Since this was not a common brand, police hoped to identify the seller or buyer of the bullets. After investigating, they discovered that a Walmart store near the crime scene had sold the bullets. A Walmart representative informed police that a man had purchased the bullets and that they had surveillance footage of the transaction. After reviewing the footage, which was recorded on September 18th, 2 days before Alicia died, police thought the buyer might be Kevin. However, they were wrong, as the man in the footage was not Kevin. The buyer paid with a credit card, allowing police to obtain his name. After investigating this new lead, police found no connection between the man and Kevin, Alicia, Amanda, or the nanny. Therefore, police needed to find new evidence to move the case forward. Amanda says that at first their relationship was good, but eventually he became violent and started hitting her. The relationship ended in a messy divorce, with a restraining order and full custody of the children awarded to Amanda. Amanda was devastated to learn that it was not Alicia who died in the shooting. Believing it was a case of mistaken identity, she believed the bullets were meant for her and told the police that Kevin was the attacker. However, according to surveillance cameras, Kevin was home at the time of the shooting. During the investigation, the police reviewed the footage taken the night of Alicia's death again. Now they noticed something they had not noticed before. This low-quality recording showed Kevin leaving the house, walking to the car and getting into the back seat behind the driver. But why wasn't he in the front passenger seat? In search of an answer, the police concluded that someone else was in the front passenger seat. So, when the car pulled up in front of Kevin's house, there were probably 2 people in the car. Police had no evidence that Kevin was involved in Alicia's death, but they collected evidence of Kevin's attacks on his ex-wife Amanda and arrested him in November 2018. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and Alicia's case remains unsolved after more than a year. A breakthrough in her case came in 2019 when a woman contacted the police station with crucial information. The woman reported that she had attended a party near Spokane, where she met a girl who claimed to be involved in a murder. This girl, Angelica, bragged about being hired to commit a crime on York Road, the same location where Alicia was shot and killed. Even though Spokane is a 5-hour drive from Everett, police decided to follow up on the lead. According to the woman, Angelica mentioned that she and her boyfriend were involved in the case, saying that the victim died from a gunshot wound to the head, fired from a corner. They were hired by the children's father. Furthermore, Angelica said that they had taken the life of the wrong person. It was a case of mistaken identity. The police have never released details about this case. Only the police and family members know that Alicia was shot in the head. Considering that Angelica knew many details about the crime, the police were interested in this information. During the search for Angelica, the police discovered that her real name was Alexis Hale. On her social media profile, they found photos of her holding a 9mm pistol, which could be the murder weapon. In addition, some videos show a man in the background, identified as her boyfriend, Jaden Feltz. A video posted by Alexis on the night of Alicia's death shows her filming through the windshield of a car, analyzing traffic signs. Police were able to pinpoint the exact location of the car, about a 10-minute drive from Kevin's house. A few days after Alicia's death, police discovered a video of Jaden bragging about a large sum of money. Further investigation led them to a social media post by Jaden, where they found 5 comments, one of which was from his aunt. When they looked at her profile, they realized she was also Kevin's mother. It turned out Jaden was Kevin's cousin. Police now had enough evidence to make an arrest. The first person to be handcuffed was Alexis Hale. She screamed and said the police couldn't arrest her because she was only 17. She knew why she was being arrested and asked for a lawyer. Around the same time, police arrested Jaden in another part of town. To build their case, police analyzed phone records from both Jaden and Alexis, revealing a trip from Spokane to Everett that coincided with the shooting. Alexis did not tell police anything. Kevin is in prison, serving a 3-year sentence for assaulting Amanda. Therefore, police hope to get some information from Jaden. Police obtained a confession and the name of the person who hired Alexis and Jaden. It was Kevin Lewis. To gather more information, the police took Jaden to the crime scene and asked him to describe what happened. Jaden began explaining how Kevin brought him there and showed him where the house was, and then Jaden took Kevin home. Jaden was then asked by the police to describe what happened when his girlfriend Alexis knocked on the door. Jaden explained that the door was ajar and Alicia stuck her head out and saw Alexis walking out the door. As Alexis was walking away, Jaden rounded the corner and started shooting. Alicia closed the door, but Jaden opened it again and continued shooting. He fired 2 more shots before Alicia was able to close the door. Jaden then said that he ran from the crime scene. Kevin Lewis was arrested on charges of aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation of murder in connection with the death of Alicia Canales-McGuire in 2017, while he was serving time for assaulting his ex-wife Amanda. The 2 people involved in the case are Jaden Phelps and Alexis Hale. Jaden, then 20, pleaded guilty to first-degree intentional homicide in July 2020 and was sentenced to 31 years in prison. Alexis, then 18, also pleaded guilty and received the 15-year sentence. During his trial, Jaden testified that he committed the crime for money and street cred. Jaden used the money Kevin paid him to get tattoos and buy a pair of Timberland boots and a Ferragamo belt. He claimed Alexis took the handgun from a family member and he split $200 with her. Kevin pleaded not guilty and went to trial later that year. The prosecution claimed that Kevin paid Jaden and Alexis $2,400 to harm his ex-wife Amanda, but that they were mistaken identities and caused Alicia's tragic death. Jaden and Alexis claimed that Kevin gave them the address. And Jaden claimed that he did not know who the target was, only the address. Jaden received the payment after dropping Kevin off at his home. Jaden and his girlfriend Alexis then returned to the location Kevin had indicated. They got out of the car and approached the house, with Jaden stopping near the garage and Alexis knocking on the front door. When Alicia answered, Alexis left and Jaden continued to fire until he ran out of ammunition. Jaden initially fired from his position near the garage and then went up to the front porch to fire the remaining shots. He pointed the gun at the house, aiming at Alicia's neck and head area. They then drove away but quickly returned, concerned that they might have left a glove at the scene. However, when they saw a police car, they turned around and left the area, using GPS directions to drive back to Spokane. The defense argued that Kevin never actually used the word kill when speaking to Jaden, and said that Kevin only said to get the target off the road. However, the prosecution countered that Kevin had a history of violence and had threatened Amanda. In November 2021, Kevin Lewis was convicted of first-degree murder after a 6-week trial, with the jury reaching a verdict in less than 3.5 hours. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole in January 2022. As part of his sentence, Kevin was also banned from contacting his ex-wife and children for the rest of his life. He is currently serving his sentence at the Washington State Prison in Walla Walla County. The case of Brittany Gregory. Brittany Gregory was born on April 1, 1988 in Brick Township and is the youngest of 5 children. Due to her parents' divorce, she had to live with her father but still maintained a close relationship with all of her siblings, especially her older sister Brianna, who is 4 years older than her. Brittany was a model student in school and her teachers believed that she had the potential to become a scholar. However, her passion and dreams were focused on something completely different. She had an ambition to become a forensic scientist and study evidence at crime scenes. At home, Brittany enjoyed her role as the youngest child in the family. According to her mother, Brittany was spoiled, but she was not vain or arrogant. Brittany was a fan of pop culture and her idol was none other than the queen of pop, Britney Spears. Her bedroom was decorated with posters of Britney Spears. Aside from music, Brittany enjoys watching cartoons, especially SpongeBob SquarePants. And she can't stop watching TV shows about forensic science, a career she aspires to pursue. Brittany's love for forensic science often brings her closer to her mother. They share a passion for watching TV shows about the subject and often call each other to discuss episodes as they watch them. Brittany, 16, and her 20-year-old sister Brianna live with their father, Joe Dunn, and his girlfriend, Lori Peterson, in a small house near their school. Their house is down the street and near a wooded area. At the time, Brittany was in a 2-year relationship with her 18-year-old boyfriend, John Fitzgerald, a nice guy whose family approved of the relationship, and they were considered the perfect couple. On Sunday, July 11th, 2004, Brittany's mother, Deborah, and her sister, Brianna, were visiting her brother and his wife, who had a newborn daughter, in the town of South Toms River, 15 miles from their home. That evening, Brittany called her mother on her cell phone at approximately 8:30 p.m. to ask for a ride to John's house. However, Brittany seemed upset. Her mother explained that she was out of town and couldn't drive Brittany, but said that her sister Brianna could be there in about an hour. Brittany agreed to wait for her sister. Approximately 45 minutes after Brittany called, Brianna was free and attempted to call her back. However, her call went unanswered, leading Brianna to assume that Brittany was either asleep or had gone to John's house with someone else. The next morning, when Brianna returned home, she found Brittany was gone, but all of her belongings, including her phone, were still in the house. This seemed unusual, as Brittany rarely left her phone behind and often informed her family of her plans. Brianna contacted Brittany's friends, but none of them knew of her sister's whereabouts. After failing to reach Brittany, Brianna decided to call John. According to John, he last spoke to Brittany on the phone on Sunday morning and they had not seen or spoken to each other since. Lori Peterson, a family friend who lived with them, said she returned home around 10 p.m. Sunday and did not find Brittany there. Brianna reported her sister missing to the police, sensing that something was wrong. Initially, the police did not believe that Brittany had actually disappeared, thinking that she might have run away or been with friends. However, Brianna explained that she had contacted Brittany's friends and boyfriend, none of whom had any information on her whereabouts. Brianna was convinced that her sister Brittany had not run away from home because she was a diligent student and spent most of her time at the library. Brittany also never left the house without notice, and all of her personal belongings, including her phone and money, were still at home. Initially, the police suspected that Brittany had run away, but after speaking with Brianna, they began a thorough investigation. First, they went to Brittany's house to check her room for clues. They confirmed that her purse, containing her phone, ID, and makeup, was still there, but they did not find anything unusual. The police interviewed everyone who lived in the house and eventually ruled out the possibility that Brittany's relatives were involved in her disappearance. Next, they expanded their search to the surrounding area, checking nearby homes, examining property, and interviewing neighbors. They are looking for potential witnesses who may have seen or heard something suspicious. While searching, officers found that Brittany's house was located at the end of the road, near a wooded area. When they spoke to neighbors, they did not see anything suspicious, except for a woman who claimed to have seen Brittany walking down the road, heading toward the wooded area. Numerous police interviews with her family, neighbor, and teachers revealed that no one had anything bad to say about Brittany. Everyone spoke very highly of her. However, her sister, Brianna, mentioned that Brittany and her boyfriend, John, had been arguing frequently recently, including one on the day she went missing. This argument upset Brittany and she wanted to visit John that evening to make up. In order to better understand John's relationship with Brittany, the police asked him to come to the police station for questioning. At the station, John reported that his last phone conversation with Brittany took place on Sunday morning. At the time, he was at the beach with friends, which upset Brittany because she was not there. The argument resulted in them not speaking to each other since then. John also revealed that he and Brittany had recently broken up. Although she knew he was dating someone else, Brittany had a hard time accepting the breakup. According to John, he had no plans to see Brittany on the night she went missing and did not know she would come to his house. He attributed the breakup to a rumor that Brittany kissed another guy at a party, which he did not witness. However, this rumor prompted him to end their relationship and start dating someone else. John last saw Brittany on July 10th, the day before she disappeared, when she gave him a letter. In the letter, Brittany expressed her desire to make amends. After receiving permission from John, the police examined the letter, which contained Brittany's apology for her actions and her desire to remain friends with John. John appeared genuinely concerned and worried about Brittany's disappearance. Despite initial suspicions, the police had no evidence linking him to her disappearance. After passing a lie detector test, he was cleared as a suspect. However, John did provide the police with one important detail. He revealed that Brittany often took a shortcut through the woods behind her father's house to visit him. This new information adds complexity to the case, leading police to consider the possibility that Brittany attempted to reach John's house, a mile away, by walking through the woods on the night she disappeared. It was nighttime when Brittany went missing, making it likely that she got lost in the dark woods along the route she had taken. In order to find her, the police launched a search in the woods near her home. However, being in the woods at night is scary and dangerous, and the question of why a young girl would not be afraid to walk through the woods in the dark is puzzling. The search in the woods lasted for 3 days but yielded no results. Just when the investigation seemed to be stalled, the police received information from a woman who claimed to have been in a nearby park the night Brittany went missing. The woman said that she had been with her brother in the quiet, deserted park, with no cars in sight except one, a Chevrolet pickup truck with distinctive wheels that had driven past. The woman had noticed the car and even remembered its license plate number. After verifying the information, the police discovered that the car belonged to Anthony Geiger, 23. To determine if Anthony was involved in Brittany's disappearance, the police began to look into his past. Their findings revealed that Anthony was the ex-boyfriend of Bobby Joe, Brittany's older sister. According to Bobby Joe, they had broken up a month earlier due to Anthony's excessive jealousy, especially his excessive attention to Brittany. She began to suspect that Anthony, 23, had feelings for her younger sister Brittany, which eventually led her to end the relationship with him. Brittany's friends recalled that Anthony often looked at Brittany strangely and tried to flirt with her. During their last meeting at lunch, Anthony tried to flirt with Brittany again. This aroused the police's suspicions, so they brought Anthony in for questioning in connection with Brittany's disappearance. Anthony claimed that he was not in the area on the evening of July 11th until the following day, July 12th, after police had begun searching for Brittany. Although he admitted to being friends with Brittany and seeing her regularly at gatherings, he maintained that they were just friends and denied any attempts to flirt with her. Anthony claimed that he considered Brittany too young for him and only saw her as a friend. According to Anthony, he was at home with his new girlfriend on the evening of July 11th. His girlfriend confirmed his alibi, but because his home was close to Brittany's, police still considered him a suspect. Police returned to examine a letter Brittany had written to John and noticed disturbing signs that she was saying goodbye to her lover, raising concerns that she may have been planning to harm herself after breaking up with her boyfriend. Brittany's parents, however, disagreed with this theory, describing their daughter as intelligent and determined. They believed that Brittany's passion for life and ambitious plans were unlikely to be derailed by a breakup. As the investigation stalled, police turned to the media to gather information from witnesses and enlisted the help of nearby police departments. Brittany's parents also joined the search effort, as they grew increasingly frustrated with waiting and doing nothing. They decided to take action by canvassing the neighborhood, going door to door and asking locals about Brittany. The police returned to the starting point of the investigation, Brittany's home. It was puzzling that she had left her phone behind, especially since she had planned to meet her boyfriend. This led to new questions. Was she kidnapped from her own home? If so, was the perpetrator someone she knew and trusted? During a thorough search of the house, the police found something important in Brittany's room, namely her diary, which contained a handwritten letter. The police considered the contents of the letter to be extremely important because it revealed the truth about Brittany's family relationships, which had been shrouded in secrecy. In the letter, Brittany described her life in detail. She wrote about her friendships, boyfriends, schoolwork, and her difficulties with her family. Specifically, she wrote that she came from a dysfunctional family, that she visited her brother in prison every Sunday, that her mother was a drug addict and abandoned her when she was 9 years old, and that she now lived with her father, with whom she was not very close, and his various girlfriends. Despite acknowledging her own shortcomings and past mistakes, Brittany expressed her determination to break free from the cycle of dysfunctional family life. Her goal was to become a forensic scientist and make a positive impact by helping solve crimes. After reading the letter, the police investigation shifted its focus to Brittany's family, who were not initially considered suspects. Police began investigating each family member and discovered that a male massage parlor, which was actually a front for prostitution, was being operated from their home by Lori Peterson, a friend of Brittany's father. Neighbors knew that Lori did not provide legitimate massages but only intimate services for money, which she openly advertised by handing out business cards in the area. Neighbors also reported that suspicious people often gathered at Brittany's father's home to use illegal drugs. Several men, most of whom Lori did not know, came to use her services. It is possible that one of her clients abducted Brittany from her home. After Brittany went missing, more than 100 police officers were tasked with identifying everyone who had visited Joe Dunn's home over the past month. A week after Brittany went missing, on July 18th, police made a breakthrough when they arrested a suspect in connection with the murder. However, at the time of the arrest, Brittany's body had not been found, making the news extremely difficult for her family to accept, as they still held out hope that she was still alive. When police released a photo of the suspect, Brittany's mother, Deborah, recognized the man as 38-year-old Jack Fuller, a family friend of 20 years. Jack regularly attended family gatherings and had developed a close relationship with the family over time, to the point where his daughter was engaged to Brittany's brother, who is currently in custody. Her mother, Deborah, was shocked by the news, finding it hard to believe that Jack could be involved in such a crime. The fact that his children were friends with Brittany made the allegations even harder to accept, and the family continued to hold out hope that Brittany was still alive. Jack had a lengthy criminal history, with numerous incidents and arrests over the years. His crimes included breaking into vehicles, homes, and sheds, as well as using and selling drugs. He was known to be aggressive, once threatening someone with a baseball bat and fighting with police during a scuffle. Jack also had a habit of lying to police about his identity, which he did after being arrested for driving under the influence. Court records show that he was arrested more than a dozen times over a 10-year period and had served time in state prison for theft and violating his parole. Neighbors said they feared Jack and often chose not to report his crimes because of threats. He was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison at his most recent trial, but was released about a year before Brittany went missing. Brittany's parents believed Jack might have stolen money or jewelry to buy drugs, but they did not believe he would harm their daughter. However, after Jack was arrested, police revealed how they were able to connect him to Brittany's disappearance. The key piece of evidence began with a phone call to the police station. The caller reported that Jack had confided in him a few days earlier about having back pain after burying a body in sandy soil. According to the caller, Jack was confident that the body's location would not be discovered and even asked for advice on how deep to bury it to avoid being smelled by animals. The police invited the informant to the police station and asked him to wear a wiretap to meet Jack Fuller and talk to him about the crimes, including the murder. The informant agreed and wore a wiretap to the meeting. During the conversation, Jack confessed to the murder, saying that he had buried the victim's body in a remote location that would never be found. However, he did not mention the victim's name. In addition, Jack said that he needed to kill someone else who knew too much. Pointing to his friend Tommy, the police were sure that Tommy knew something important that could help solve the case, otherwise Jack would not want to eliminate him. The police took Tommy to the police station for questioning, but he initially refused to cooperate, claiming that he had no information about the case. However, the police knew he was not telling the truth. The police played Tommy a recorded conversation between Jack and another person, in which Jack revealed his desire to harm Tommy because he was likely to reveal information. Realizing that his safety was in danger, Tommy decided to work with the police. He explained that on the night Brittany went missing, he and Jack had been driving around the neighborhood smoking marijuana. They stopped in front of Brittany's house, and Jack decided to go in to talk to Brittany's father about some issues. When he entered, Jack discovered that Brittany was the only person there. 5 minutes after Jack left, he returned to the car with Brittany, who was sitting in the back seat. Tommy said he was confused by her sudden appearance and asked what was going on, but Brittany remained silent, avoiding eye contact. Jack only said that he would drive Tommy home. When they arrived at Tommy's house, Brittany got out of the back seat and moved into the front passenger seat after Tommy got out of the car. Jack then drove away with Brittany. The next day, Jack did not mention the events of the previous day when he met Tommy again. That day, Jack took his car to the car wash, where he washed it thoroughly inside and out. This behavior was unusual for Jack, as he had never done this before. The car wash attendant even joked about washing the car thoroughly, but Jack reacted aggressively, warning the attendant to mind his own business or he would be in danger. Tommy discovered that Brittany was missing and immediately suspected Jack of being involved. He directly asked Jack what happened to her, but Jack's response was aggressive and evasive. Jack claimed to have taken Brittany home, but his attitude was threatening, warning Tommy to ignore it or he would be in trouble. The police found Jack's behavior suspicious and decided to arrest him. Upon arrival, they found Jack holding a can of gasoline, apparently preparing to set the car on fire to destroy potential evidence. During the search, blood was found in the car, and forensics determined that it was Brittany's blood. After the police found out that Jack had visited a car wash after a trip with Brittany, they went there and confiscated the vacuum cleaner he was using. A major discovery was made when criminologists found blood-stained sand inside a vacuum cleaner, and subsequent testing confirmed that the blood was Brittany's. However, despite this incriminating evidence, Jack refused to confess to Brittany's abduction and murder. He also refused to discuss the matter further. The police interviewed all of Jack's acquaintances. Most of them believed that Jack was capable of murder, describing him as a reckless man. Many described him as someone who would do anything. Although Jack did not work anywhere, he always had money. A major revelation came during the investigation. A patrol officer reported seeing Jack's car parked on the side of the road near the woods on the night Brittany disappeared. At the time, police were unaware of Brittany's disappearance and approached Jack, who claimed he was looking for his dog that had run off into the woods. With this information, the search for the body focused on the area where police had seen Jack's car. A comprehensive search effort was launched, involving officers, K-9 units, helicopters, and volunteers. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, the search was unsuccessful in locating Brittany's body. Police believe Brittany needed a ride to her boyfriend's house that night and asked Jack for help. Jack agreed, but instead of taking her to her destination, he dropped off his friend Tommy and took advantage of the situation to attack and kill Brittany. Police needed to find her body to build a case against Jack. While police were trying to get Jack to confess, a vital witness came forward. A woman who had previously been held hostage by Jack for months contacted police, claiming that she might know where he had hidden Brittany's body. The woman was a former drug addict, and Jack had held her hostage for months before she escaped. She had learned of Jack's habits during her captivity and knew his usual haunts. She remembered him showing her a location near power lines, which he claimed would be the perfect place to dump the body without being detected. Initially, police were skeptical of the woman's claims but began questioning her. She provided detailed information about the location, including its location in Lakewood and the condition of the soil. This information caught the attention of police, as it matched an earlier tip from an informant who reported that Jack had complained about the difficulty of burying a body in sandy soil. Police conducted a search in the area identified by the woman, about 3 miles from Brittany's residence. The search effort, involving more than 100 people each day, continued for several days despite initially being fruitless. However, a major breakthrough came when experts compared sand found in Jack's vacuum cleaner at the car wash with soil in the search area, confirming a perfect match. The discovery fueled police's determination to continue searching the densely wooded area on the border of Monmouth and Ocean counties. On the morning of Tuesday, July 27, 2004, 15 days after Brittany was reported missing, she was found by 3 New Jersey K-9 officers who had brought their dogs along on a weekend search to help. Brittany's body was found in a ditch, and a collar with Brittany's name on it was found around her neck. Police knew right away that they had finally found her. The medical examiner confirmed the body's identity as Brittany Gregory through an autopsy. However, due to significant decomposition and multiple injuries, including strangulation and severe head trauma, the medical examiner was unable to determine a sole cause of death. A prosecutor clarified that head trauma was not the primary cause of death. Brittany's body showed no obvious signs of sexual assault, but the medical examiner did not rule out rape. Jack eventually accepted the plea deal after discussing the option with his attorney, a decision that was also supported by Brittany's family, who wanted to avoid a lengthy and grueling trial. Brittany's mother explained that her primary motivation for the deal was not to seek the death penalty for Jack, as she believed that would be too easy an outcome for him. Instead, she wanted Jack to spend the rest of his life in prison, reflecting on his actions and suffering the consequences of his actions. According to Jack, the chain of events that led to the incident began when Brittany asked him to drive her to her boyfriend's house, which Jack agreed to. After dropping off his companion, Tommy, Jack was going to take Brittany to her destination. However, he stopped on the side of the road and started smoking marijuana, which angered Brittany. She screamed and slapped him on the hand. This provoked a violent reaction from Jack, who began punching Brittany. Jack confessed to punching Brittany in the face and head at least twice because she tried to interfere with his marijuana smoking. After the attack, Brittany began gasping for air and making gurgling noises while Jack continued to get high as blood poured from her nose and mouth. When he finally turned to her, Brittany had stopped breathing. He realized she was dead and decided to dispose of her body. However, Jack's testimony was not credible because the medical examiner found signs of strangulation that Jack did not mention. Additionally, he did not explain why he removed all of Brittany's clothes. The prosecution believed the crime was sexually motivated, and a jury indicted Jack on February 9, 2005, for murder. Jack Fuller pleaded guilty on October 18, 2005, to intentionally causing serious injury resulting in death. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison without parole on January 13. The case of Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was born on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but grew up near Fayetteville. She is the second child in a family of many children and lived a life of abject poverty in rural North Carolina. Her family worked on a small farm growing tobacco and cotton. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was worn down by the struggles of farm life and had a temper as unpredictable as the weather. Velma claimed that her father was physically and sexually abusive to her and her sisters, though other relatives denied this. Her mother, Lillian Bullard, often suffered the most from her husband's anger. In there, love is a luxury that is hard to come by. This causes Velma and her siblings to experience a childhood deprived of affection and constantly threatened with violence. When Velma was young, she noticed the financial differences between her family and her peers. This awareness led to her first criminal activities. She started taking small amounts of money from her father to buy items her classmates had. She became more and more thieving when she stole $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father found out, he beat her severely, and Velma stopped stealing for the rest of her childhood. Raised in a Christian home, Velma found comfort in her Bible, holding on to her faith despite her troubled home life. She has always considered her early exposure to religion an important factor in her chaotic life. However, as she entered her teenage years, the emotional wounds from her upbringing began to shape who she would become. World War II caused upheaval around the world. The war was over, but it still caused her family more difficulties and stress. Like many of her generation, Velma was forced to grow up early. Her dreams and aspirations are often overshadowed by the demands of life and family responsibilities. However, during this challenging time, her resilience and determination emerged, traits that would come to define her both admirably and tragically. When Velma entered early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the limitations of her home grew stronger. She dreamed of escaping. At 17, she left school. In her quest for love and stability, Velma joined Thomas Burke, a relationship that promised freedom but brought new challenges. By the age of 19, she already had 2 children, a son named Ronnie Burke and a daughter named Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina, for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed to be a hard-won escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. In 1965, everything changed when Thomas was involved in a serious car accident and sustained head injuries. To manage the intense pain and headaches, he turned to heavy drinking and drug use. His battle with alcohol echoed the struggles of Velma's father, bringing back her past traumas. The abuse and neglect she had promised never to repeat began to affect her own family. The strains of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and her past experiences bore down on her. Velma began working at a textile factory but had to leave due to health issues. She needed an urgent hysterectomy, which affected her confidence and femininity. After the operation, she experienced severe back pain and started using prescription drugs for relief. However, she gradually became addicted, which impaired her judgment and led to future tragedies. On April 4, 1969, Velma had an intense argument with her husband. Later that same day, while she and the children were out, the house caught fire. Thomas, who was inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was completely destroyed. Velma and the children moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating Jennings Barfield. They got married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings mysteriously fell ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved back into her parents' home. Shortly after, her father passed away from lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother experienced severe stomach pain and was hospitalized. After recovering, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th of that year, her mother was hospitalized again with severe stomach symptoms. Unfortunately, doctors couldn't diagnose or treat her illness, and she died 2 hours later. No autopsy was conducted. A series of mysterious deaths occurred around Velma. Her son Ronnie expressed sadness and confusion, questioning why God would allow such suffering to befall his mother, a devoted Christian. Meanwhile, Velma's addiction created financial difficulties, leading her to make another poor decision: check forgery. However, her dishonest actions came at a cost. The people around her no longer believed her. In 1975, Velma Barfield was found guilty of writing 7 bad checks and received a 6-month prison sentence. She was let out after serving 3 months. Following her release in 1976, she found work caring for elderly individuals. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly, his 84-years-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly, his 84-years-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery passed away on January 29, 1977, after falling ill. Just over a month after her husband's death, in February, Dolly began showing signs of a stomach illness similar to the one that had affected Velma's mother. Dolly's condition took a turn for the worse, and she died on March 1st. Following this, Velma took on the responsibility of caring for 76-years-old Record Lee, who had suffered a broken leg. On June 4, 1977, Record Lee's husband, John Henry, started having severe pain in my stomach and chest along with vomiting and diarrhea. Initially, doctors believed he was suffering from a severe stomach virus. Unfortunately, he did not survive and passed away later that month. Later in 1977, Velma began living with her boyfriend Roland Stewart Taylor, who was related to Dolly. He was a widower and a tobacco farmer. The two attended a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County, where Roland suddenly fell ill with severe stomach pain. He was hospitalized and died a few days later. Those close to Stewart grew suspicious as they witnessed his rapidly declining health. Ultimately, their suspicions led the authorities to investigate Velma, starting a chain of shocking truths that gradually came to light. An autopsy has been performed as part of the investigation into Roland's death. The process was thorough, with each test, interview, and piece of evidence increasing the suspicion surrounding Velma. In a criminal investigation, evidence often comes from a small clue, a moment of intuition, or a previously undiscovered connection. For the team seeking justice for Roland and other victims, this evidence came through forensic evidence. Traces of arsenic were found in Roland's body. Before the autopsy results were announced, Lumberton police received an anonymous call, allegedly from Velma's sister, claiming that Velma had poisoned Roland and others. Velma was subsequently arrested for the murder of Roland. Following Velma's arrest, Jennings Barfield's body was exhumed, and traces of arsenic were discovered. Velma carefully crafted her lies, but they began to unravel. The art of interrogation is very sophisticated, involves back-and-forth communication between investigators and suspects, in which each question is intended to uncover the hidden corners of the human mind. For Velma, the questions the interrogator asked reflected the very questions she had long been reluctant to answer. In the interrogation room, before the clear evidences, the truth was finally clarified. To seeking comfort, Velma consulted a spiritual advisor. She discovered the courage to face her past. For Velma, confessing was a journey back to her soul. Filled with regret, she began to speak. A series of facts, long hidden by fear, shame, poured out. Her confession deeply pained her family, who were unknowingly entangled in her deception. The woman they love commits terrible crimes, causing them to rethink forgiveness and their notions of right and wrong. Velma admitted to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry, her mother Lillian, and her boyfriend Roland. Although arsenic was discovered in Jennings Barfield's body, Velma claimed she did not kill him. Her motive for murder was to steal money from the victim to satisfy her drug addiction. Additionally, she took out a loan in her mother's name. Each of her mistake decisions stemmed from addiction, greatly affected her life and those close to her. Confronted with the risk of being exposed, Velma made a decision that permanently changed her life. The transition from one crime to another can be a slippery slope. She repeatedly committed the unimaginable. Velma attended her victims' funerals, appearing to genuinely grieve their deaths. The weight of the secret left her alone, but the human mind, skilled at self-preservation, often uses justification to protect itself from harsh realities and finds ways to rationalize even the darkest actions. Velma would steal money from her victims and then poison them if they became suspicious. To outsiders, she appeared to be a devout churchgoer, a caring nurse, and a loving family member. However, she was caught in a struggle between the remnants of her conscience and her overwhelming desire to avoid the consequences of her actions. She forged checks on her boyfriend Roland's account. When he presumably found out, she mixed arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea to keep her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense team argued that she was insane, but this argument was rejected. She seemed unfeeling, even laughing at the prosecutor and applauding the district attorney after his closing argument. The prosecution described Velma as not being a churchgoer as she claimed, but as a calculating murderer, driven by dark motives, stating that she was responsible for her actions and deserved the harshest punishment. Conversely, the defense argued that she was a troubled individual, trapped by addiction, abuse, and uncontrollable circumstances. They emphasized that her mental health struggles are a factor that could reduce her responsibility for the crimes. In the realm of law and justice, the truth is often more complicated, deeply intertwined with human emotions. She confessed to committing 6 murders, but was only found guilty of the first-degree murder of Roland. In December 1978, the jury identified aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. At the time, there was no designated holding area for female death row prisoners, and Velma was the only female on death row in North Carolina. As a result, she was held at Central Prison in Raleigh, in a section for prisoners prone to escape and those with mental illnesses. Later, a unit specifically for female death row inmates was created at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma stopped using drugs and expressed regret for how pills had clouded her judgment and damaged her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she begins to confront her past. The nights were long, the faces of the victims haunted her dreams, and the silence intensified her thoughts and regrets. In these moments of reflection, Velma became fully aware of what she had done, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her discussions with the prison chaplain were not just about appealing for a reduced sentence, but also about understanding atonement and the challenging journey of forgiving herself. While in jail, Velma admitted that she had never been a true Christian. Her faith had been superficial. However, as she awaited her trial, she sincerely embraced Jesus, receiving forgiveness and salvation. In her autobiography, she wrote that throughout her life she was burdened by guilt because she did not know she could do better. What was more amazing, she said, was that Jesus was willing to be her friend. Even then, she could talk to him, and he listened. Velma became a dedicated Christian and spent her last 6 years helping other inmates find faith. Velma became a supportive figure for them in her unique way. Her active involvement in the Christian community, Velma had her sentence changed from death to life in prison. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt, arguing that her newfound Christian faith should be considered a mitigating factor. Many Christians across the United States supported her, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham, with Ruth regularly exchanging letters with Velma. However, the victims' families thought that Velma's conversion was just a fraud and a ploy for her to avoid the death penalty. They see her as a cold-blooded woman who killed their loved ones. Despite this, Velma remained the devoted mother and grandmother. She cherished family visits every weekend and enjoyed spending time with her children and grandchildren. In 1980, psychiatrist Selwyn Rose evaluated Velma and testified in state court. He stated that she suffered from 3 disorders: multiple prescription drug abuse, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose felt he never had a complete understanding of Velma. Velma's son, Ronnie Burke, asked her if she had killed Thomas. She responded that she was sure she probably did. She couldn't remember clearly but believed she had left a cigarette or match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk Thomas to sleep in their burning house. Velma admitted to the pastor that she had killed Jennings. She expressed relief that everything had come to light because she feared she might poison her grandchildren. Velma did not understand why she committed the murder and felt unable to stop herself. The governor of North Carolina denied Velma's clemency request, stating that her victims died in a torturous manner. An appeal was made based on testimony from Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a psychiatry professor at New York University School of Medicine. She claimed that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder and had shown patterns of manic depressive disorder earlier in her life. Velma filed her final appeal on October 30, 1984, in the North Carolina Supreme Court, arguing that she was incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was rejected in federal court. The day before her execution, she instructed her attorney, Jimmy Little, to withdraw all appeals. In her last hours, Velma chose to reflect and pray, finding solace in her faith. During that time, the renowned pastor Billy Graham spoke with her over the phone, saying that in a way, he envied her because she was going to get to heaven before he did. Before her execution on November 2, 1984, at Central Prison in Raleigh, Velma released a statement expressing her remorse for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged that everyone had suffered, including all the connected families, and offered her apologies. She also extended her gratitude to everyone who had supported her over the past 6 years, expressing appreciation for her family, her attorneys, and all those who had shown her kindness, including the prison department staff. She was thankful for everything they had done for her during those 6 years. She chose cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola for her last meal. She had her final visits with family and friends and mentioned that entering the gas chamber at 2 a.m. would be her gateway to heaven. She wore pink pajamas for the execution, with a stethoscope and heart monitor attached to her chest. A wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was strapped onto it before being taken to the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. outside the prison. Several groups of protesters gathered, including both supporters and opponents of the death penalty. Some protesters criticized Governor Hunt for lacking mercy and compassion, believing that the condemned could still contribute positively by helping fellow inmates while serving life in prison. Inside the prison, inmates banged rhythmically on their cell windows as they awaited the execution. Approximately 80 supporters of capital punishment gathered to cheer and applaud. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers, with 1 intravenous line serving as a dummy so that none of the volunteers knew who actually delivered the lethal dose. Velma was pronounced dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after receiving the injection of proton bromide. Witnesses to the execution said Velma died peacefully, with no signs of pain. Around 300 death penalty opponents held a silent vigil, holding candles that were extinguished at the moment of her execution at 2:25 a.m. Velma's body was transported by ambulance to a medical school, fulfilling her wish to donate her organs for transplantation. She was later buried in a small cemetery in North Carolina beside her first husband, Thomas. The case of Teresa Halbach. Teresa was born on March 22, 1980, in a family of 5 siblings. Her parents, Richard and Karen, raised her on their family dairy farm. Tragically, her father passed away when she was 8. Later, Karen married Richard's brother, Thomas, and they raised their blended family together. Teresa loved the outdoors and dreamed of becoming a photojournalist for National Geographic. Her friends commented that she had a special ability to make people feel welcome. She is a very studious person and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in photography from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. After graduation, Teresa continued working with Pierce Photography, where she had interned during college. She started her own business, Photography by Teresa, operating out of the Pierce studio. Teresa traveled widely and took freelance jobs with Auto Trader magazine, photographing vehicles for sale to supplement her income. Unfortunately, this job led to her untimely death. All the evidence pointed to one person, Stephen Avery. Stephen contacted Teresa to arrange a photo shoot of his sister's minivan. Records show she was last seen at 2:30 p.m. that day, a fact confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby, who reported seeing the car enter the salvage yard. Stephen was first charged with a weapons violation, as he was a convicted felon. On November 11, 2005, he was charged with Teresa's murder, kidnapping, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. Stephen's blood was found in Teresa's SUV, and her car keys were discovered in his room. Throughout, Stephen claimed he was innocent and that the police were framing him. At the time, he was involved in a $36 million civil lawsuit against Manitowoc County. Stephen Avery, born on July 9, 1962, is from Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. He grew up with his two brothers, Charles and Earl, and his sister Barbara, raised by their parents, Dolores and Alan. He dropped out of high school, and it was reported that he had an IQ of 70. He had several run-ins with the law. In 1981, Stephen spent 10 months in jail for burglarizing a bar. The following year, he was convicted of animal cruelty for pouring gasoline on his pet cat and throwing it into a bonfire, for which he served an additional 9 months. In 1985, he threatened his cousin, Sharon Morris, by chasing her out onto the street and pointing a gun at her, allegedly because he wanted her to stop spreading rumors about him. Sharon filed a report accusing him of repeatedly leaving naked and waiting in the front yard. Although he received a 6-year sentence for this crime, but then he was granted bail. Next was a case of mistaken identity, causing him to suffer an unjust prison sentence of nearly 20 years. On July 29, 1985, Penny Bjornson reported that she was attacked and assaulted while walking on the beach near Two Rivers. The police thought the description of suspect she provided closely matched Stephen. He was then arrested and charged with the attack on Penny. A state-appointed forensic official testified that a hair found on Stephen's shirt was consistent with that of Penny. This evidence led to his conviction in December 1985, despite 16 witness statements and a time-stamped receipt proving his whereabouts at the time of the attack. Stephen was convicted of rape and attempted murder and was sentenced to 32 years in prison. He maintained his innocence and appealed in 1987 and 1996, but both appeals were denied by the higher courts. In 2001, Stephen contacted the Wisconsin Innocence Project, which took on his case. In 2002, DNA evidence proved his innocence, and Stephen was exonerated. It was later discovered that the suspect in Penny's attack was Gregory Allen, and he confessed in 1995. Gregory and Stephen looked very similar, and although Gregory committed a similar crime in the same area and was under police surveillance, but he was not considered a suspect. Gregory was not even included in the lineup of suspects. After spending 18 years in prison, Stephen was freed on September 11, 2003. He then filed a $36 million civil lawsuit against former Sheriff Thomas Kukurek and former District Attorney Dennis Vogel. His freedom, however, would not last long. When Teresa was reported missing, searches were conducted at the junkyard, the last place where she had been seen, as confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby Dassey. Stephen claimed that he had spoken to Teresa when she came to take pictures, and then she left. In addition to the bone fragments, the SUV keys, and the blood found in the car, a bullet with Teresa's DNA was discovered in the garage. While in jail, Stephen's younger nephew, Brendan Dassey, was also questioned about the murder. Brendan, who was 16 years old at the time, was questioned by police without his parents or lawyer accompany. He confessed to investigators that first he and Stephen assaulted Teresa and then murdered her. They burned her body to destroy the evidence. Brendan was charged in March 2006 as an accessory to the murder. He later recanted his confession, claiming he was coerced by detectives. Brendan was charged with the same crimes as Stephen, even though there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. Stephen was convicted in March 2007 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Later that year, Brendan was also found guilty and given a life sentence, with the possibility of parole in 2048. This murder case did not have a clear solution and caused much controversy after the conviction. A petition urging the White House to pardon Stephen and Brendan collected over 128,000 signatures but ultimately had no effect. The White House clarified that, since the convictions occurred in a state court, the president lacks the authority to issue pardons. Many people, including Stephen and Brendan's families, believe in their innocence and hope the real killer of Teresa will be found. Stephen's ex-fiancée, Sandy Greenman, also believed that he is innocent. She started a Facebook page to raise awareness about the case, describing him as a model man. She expressed frustration that people wrongly portray Stephen as perpetually violent, but which is not true. Most notable, however, is the support of Kim Kardashian. As a socialite, she used her position to help Case get a fair trial. After learning about the case through social media, she became interested. Despite her attempts to appeal to the governor, also has no effect. However, she remains determined to seek justice for both Stephen and Brendan. On the other hand, some people believe that Stephen is the suspect, including Jody Stakowski, another ex-fiancée of his. Initially, Jody supported Stephen's innocence. Later, she confessed that she lied and it was all an act. In an interview with Nancy Grace, Jody claimed that Stephen had threatened to kill her, her family, and a friend. She alleged that he wanted revenge on women after he was wrongfully convicted in Penny's case. She stated that Stephen was the one person she couldn't trust and that he was a monster. To avoid a conflict of interest, Manitowoc County handed over the case to neighboring Calumet County. However, as part of the agreement, Calumet County was allowed to utilize Manitowoc County's resources, including personnel. A Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy found a key in Stephen's room after multiple searches. The defense team alleged that the blood evidence discovered in the car was actually taken from a vial containing Stephen's blood from a prior conviction. They claimed that the blood vial had been tampered with, citing a visible puncture hole on the stopper. However, the prosecution disputed this claim by testing the blood for a preservative typically found in stored blood samples, but not in fresh human blood. The test results showed no presence of the preservative. Stephen's defense team presented an expert witness who testified that a negative test result for the preservative did not mean it was absent, as the testing technology itself might be inconclusive. Brendan Dassey, who was 16 years old at the time, he was interviewed without a lawyer or parent present. Notably, Brendan had an IQ of 73, indicating intellectual disability, which may have made him more vulnerable to suggestion during questioning. Police used the Reed technique, a method that has been criticized as coercive, raising concerns about the reliability of Brendan's testimony. The Reed technique has faced criticism for leading to a high number of false confessions, particularly among juveniles and individuals with mental impairments. This method aims to make suspects feel comfortable with their interrogators, ultimately encouraging them to confess. During the interrogation process, suspects are presented with evidence that proves their guilt. In Brendan's case, he initially agreed with the interrogators but later retracted his confession. He claimed that his initial defense team worked with the prosecution to coerce a confession from him, which he later denied. Stephen and Brendan have repeatedly appealed their convictions, but have been denied each time and remain in prison. Their defense teams have made extensive efforts to secure retrials, but so far have been unsuccessful. However, Brendan is now being represented by Professors Laura Nyroder and Stephen Drizzen from the Northwestern University Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth. Despite encountering numerous obstacles, they continue to pursue appeals on his behalf. Stephen Avery's decision to hire Kathleen Zellner as his lawyer has greatly affected his case. It has raised concerns about the accuracy of the prosecution's claims. His previous lawyers, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, have leveraged their newfound fame to promote the case and raise awareness about Stephen. Kathleen Zellner, a highly accomplished trial lawyer, has successfully overturned 19 wrongful convictions. Her meticulous approach and relentless pursuit of justice resulted in the discovery of crucial missing evidence, helping to exonerate her client. Kathleen quickly got to work after being appointed to Stephen's defense team, and she believes in her client's innocence. One of the first things she wanted to clear up was the confession of Joseph Evans Jr., a Wisconsin inmate serving a life sentence for killing his wife. He claimed that he was also behind Teresa's death and trying to frame Stephen. However, Kathleen rejected Joseph's claim, viewing it as a blatant attempt to gain attention. Joseph had previously sought attention by writing a lengthy letter to the media, said that he had overheard Stephen confessing to the crime. This time, Joseph was probably motivated by the prospect of getting some bonus money, which he could use to improve his life in prison. As a result, his claim is not being considered credible. In August 2016, Kathleen filed a motion requesting new scientific testing, offering to pay for it herself. Her goal was to gather evidence to prove that Stephen was wrongly accused. The testing aimed to analyze 3 separate burn pits, which allegedly contained human remains. A notable discovery was a human pelvic bone fragment, which had been previously given to the family Teresa as part of her remains. Kathleen argued that this bone was planted in Stephen's burn pit. However, the defense team was not allowed to test the bone, as it was not disclosed to them, which Kathleen considered a Brady violation. This meant that potentially exonerating evidence was not properly disclosed. Kathleen remains dogged in her pursuit of justice. She approaches the case from a different angle, one that may help point to a new suspect in the case. Since the bone fragments couldn't be tested, she decided to conduct forensic testing on the Dassey family computer. What she found was disgusting. The computer contained pornographic, depicts women in various stages of torture, including violent images and videos showing women as victims. These images were reportedly accessed when Bobby Dassey was at home. Kathleen also discovered that Bobby's family members, including his mother Barbara, Stephen's sister, and her husband Scott Tadich, were allegedly attempting to destroy evidence that could incriminate Bobby. The forensic team successfully extracted 2,449 pages of data from the computer, including all of Bobby's searches, videos, and photos, which were saved to a CD-ROM and submitted as part of the motion for a retrial. Bobby is Brendan's older brother and Stephen's nephew. He played a crucial role as the prosecution's key eyewitness in Stephen's trial. According to Bobby, he last saw Teresa heading to his uncle's house, but when he returned from hunting that afternoon, both Teresa and her car were gone. Additionally, Bobby's half-brother, Brad Dassey, has made some claims that have added to the complexity of the case. Brad believes that Stephen is innocent. Furthermore, he has stated that his stepmother, Barbara, and Scott, Stephen's brother-in-law, deleted all the pornographic material from the computer. It is also reported that Barbara has filed a harassment lawsuit against Brad following a conversation they had about recovering deleted files from a computer. Some people think that this lawsuit is partly intended to keep Brad quiet about what he knows. A crucial piece of evidence may ultimately seal Bobby's fate. At the same time, it can exonerate Stephen and Brendan. An eyewitness named Thomas Sowinski has come forward with a sworn statement claiming he saw Bobby, accompanied by an older man, pushing Teresa's SUV into the salvage yard. Thomas was driving by while delivering newspapers and passed by the pair twice. The second time, Bobby allegedly stepped in front of Thomas's car, forcing him to swerve to avoid a collision. Thomas continued on his delivery route, but noticed Bobby seemed unhappy to see him. After the SUV was discovered, Thomas realized the importance of what he had seen and contacted the police. However, when he shared his account, police dismissed him, said they knew who the suspect was, and he never heard from them again. For Kathleen, this presents a clear contradiction to the prosecution's main witness. If proven, which she is confident will happen, Bobby's testimony would be discredited. Kathleen argues that the exclusion of crucial evidence supporting Stephen's case denied him a fair opportunity to prove his innocence years ago. A newly filed appeal is currently under review by the court, with a decision expected in November 2022. Stephen Avery maintains his innocence. Kathleen emphasizes that she represents those wrongly convicted and warns that she will discover any deception. The case of Ronald Platt. On July 28, 1996, in South England, Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a day of fishing on their Brixham trawler, Mulcahy. After an unproductive day, they decided to venture further into an area known as the Roughs. They lowered their net into the water and waited. Soon, they felt the familiar pull of a heavy catch. John thought they had caught a big fish and decided to bring the net back to the surface. However, it wasn't a fish. John and his son were shocked and a dead body fell onto their deck. John quickly notified the Brixham Coast Guard. The body was badly decomposed, indicating it had been in the ocean for a while. Although fish had nibbled on it, the man was dressed neatly in a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. The police observed that his pockets were emptied, and he had no identification. The only distinguishing features were a badly smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was transferred to the medical examiner's office in Devon. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. The tattoo looked like a group of stars. The only serious injury was on his head. It was not fatal and, along with other bruises, appeared to be consistent with having been dragged along the seabed before being brought onto the boat. His lungs were filled with water. It was determined that he died from drowning, something common in the area given that the English Channel is right off the coast. The police suspected he might have fallen overboard during one of the ferry crossings. The only other way to identify him was through dental records. If he was a British citizen, his records would be available, so the examiner proceeded with this method. However, it would take some time. By chance, a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch. It was a Rolex Oyster self-winding watch, fully waterproof and needing motion to stay active for 48 hours. They could trace the ownership if it was genuine. By examining the watch, the investigators could determine that the man drowned on July 20th, 1996, because the calendar feature showed the date as July 22nd. They also found a serial number hidden between the strap and the watch face. This number was sent to Rolex to check if the watch was authentic and if it had been serviced by the owner. Several weeks later, investigators identified him as Ronald Joseph Platt through Rolex records. The medical examiner confirmed this with dental records. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman. Records show he was born in Calgary, Canada, in 1945 before his family relocated to Britain. Ronald was unmarried and had previously served as a soldier in the British Army for his national service. Close friends described him as a quiet, introverted man. He loves his native Canada very much. He is also passionate about electronics and precision engineering, which led him to purchase a Rolex in Germany in 1967. It became one of his most treasured possessions. And his ex-partners noted that he would not even remove his watch to shower. With this information, investigators needed to determine Ronald how he ended up entangled in a fishing trawler. Detective Constable Ian Clenahan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case right from the start. Police discovered that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, far from where his body was found. Clenahan contacted the Essex Police Department for further investigation. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to go to the address to help investigate the case. When Peter visited, the house was empty. He contacted the owner, who explained that the previous occupant had moved out some time ago, but provided the detective with a reference letter. The letter contained the forwarding address and contact number for someone named David Davis. Upon calling the provided number, Peter was able to reach David. The detective inquired about the relationship between Ronald and David before explaining that the body they discovered in Devon was possibly that of his friend. David agreed to visit the Essex police. Peter met with him and found he to be friendly and confident. However, David was quiet and didn't ask many questions about Ronald's death or how it was discovered. When asked, David mentioned that he and Ronald had been friends for several years. He told Peter that he hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months. The last time they met, he had lent Ronald money to start an electrical business in France. David believed that Ronald had been living in France all this time. During the interview, Peter discovered that the tattoo on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. David explained Ronald's affection for Canada. After sharing all the information he had, he left the station, promising to send Detective Peter a photo of Ronald. A few days later, Peter received the photo as promised. The Essex police had been able to conclude the investigation, arriving at the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the canal. This matched the story told by David. It had simply been an unfortunate accident. While the Essex case was being closed, Detective Constable Ian Clenahan needed to resolve the loose ends on his side. He tried to contact David several times, but was unsuccessful. So, he turned to his colleague Peter in Essex for help in getting in touch with David. Then Peter agreed and visited David. The meeting took place in the rural area of Essex, where there were only 4 houses, each with a name instead of a traditional number. Peter knocked on the first door, and an elderly couple answered. When they asked Peter whom he was looking for, he gave them the name David Davis. The couple informed Peter that their neighbor was not Davis, but Ronald Platt. They then described Ronald to Peter, and he realized that it was the same man he had met before. Redmond realized something was amiss. He reached out to Clenahan in Devon and shared how, by pure luck, he knew more another part of the story. Detectives from both areas now understood that the situation was more complicated than at first. Peter turned his attention to collecting details about David, the man impersonating his deceased friend, Ronald. Then Peter returned to visit the elderly couple he knew as Frank and Aubrey. They recounted the story of Ronald Platt, his much younger wife, and their 2 young children. Ronald and his family often vacationed in Devon because they had a yacht there, but the specific name of the place couldn't be recalled. In Devon, Clenahan began reviewing the evidence and started by interviewing old witnesses. His first visit was to John. When questioned, John explained that the net used had pulled up a 10-pound anchor along with Ronald's body. John had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it to his mother to sell. Luckily, the anchor wasn't sold, allowing investigators to recover and preserve it as evidence. Clenahan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He reached out to Ronald's brother Brian, who mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's former partner of 13 years. Investigators visited Elaine and uncovered the link between Ronald and David. Elaine had met David in 1991 while she was working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She described David as tall, engaging, and charming. They then talked about David moving to Yorkshire, and the subject turned to jobs. David wanted Elaine to join his company. Elaine mentioned it would be temporary because she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada. David, trying to win her over, suggested he could help them save money for the move. Soon, Elaine started working as his executive assistant and later introduced Ronald to David, leading the two men to quickly become friends. Ronald and Elaine was fascinated by David's boastful stories and admired his luxurious lifestyle. David offered them to become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Initially, Elaine was hesitant about the offer. David explained why he didn't want his name associated with the company. He claimed that his ex-wife was a wealthy doctor in New York who continued to demand alimony from him. At this point, Ronald and Elaine had come to trust David and believed that David was actually trying to keep distance himself from his ex-wife. David sends Elaine and Ronald to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf and gradually draws them into his plot. On Christmas Day 1992, David invited the couple to spend the day with him and his daughter Noelle. After a satisfying meal, they sat down to exchange gifts. Elaine received a card titled "The Ultimate Gift." David had promised to buy Elaine and Ronald 2 tickets to Canada if they used them before February 1993. Elaine felt overwhelmed by the short notice, but Ronald was ecstatic. His lifelong dream of returning to Canada was coming true, thanks to the generosity of David, a man he considered a true friend. David persuaded them that it was better to begin their new life sooner rather. He quickly started preparing for their departure. David suggested to both Elaine and Ronald that they should have stamps made of their signatures, in case he needed to sign any documents urgently. David would also keep their driver's licenses with him in case he needed to prove their identity. This request wasn't difficult for the couple because they trusted David, who had just helped them get started. So, in February 1993, Elaine and Ronald flew to Canada to start their new lives. Canada did not provide the better opportunities Elaine and Ronald had hoped for. They arrived in the country during winter, found little work, and financial struggles quickly led to relationship issues. They attempted to overcome these challenges, but the increasing tension caused them to grow apart. 5 months later, Elaine went back to England to be a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no plans to return to Canada. David, now a family friend, was invited to the wedding. At the event, he spoke with Elaine and asked about Ronald. He was saddened to learn that she would not be going back to Canada and that her relationship with Ronald had ended. David attempted to persuade Elaine to reconsider and give Ronald another chance in Canada. When she declined, David suddenly changed tactics. He quickly arranged to move himself, leaving Elaine only with his mobile number. Their friendship eventually faded, and the calls stopped as well. Elaine and Ronald were no longer in touch. After leaving Canada, she had not communicated with her ex-lover Ronald or her former close friend David. So, when David reached out to Elaine late in 1996, she didn't think much of the unexpected conversation, as they had little to say to each other after such a long time. David did not mention Ronald, and that was the end of it. He did not tell her that Ronald had died. After the interview, Elaine told the police she suspected David might have been involved in Ronald's death. Elaine provided important clues about the relationship between David and Ronald, but investigators needed more concrete evidence. They started interviewing witnesses after the wedding in Harrogate. David quickly fled with his family to Devon, where he began using the name Ronald Platt. He introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes and other times Noelle Platt. It was well known that he owned a yacht, which raised further suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and David together a month before Ronald's body was found. They are said to have booked rooms at the Steam Packet Inn as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, the police were certain that David was lying about Ronald and what he knew about his death. They just needed one more piece of evidence. By examining David's mobile phone records, they found that calls were made from the same area where the medical examiner estimated Ronald had drowned. The Essex police planned a sting operation to arrest David on suspicion of Ronald's murder. They waited for him at the Chelmsford train station after receiving a tip-off from Elaine, who had arranged to meet David for coffee. However, David managed to slip away. Peter then was decided to drive by David's family home. In that place, Peter noticed activity, but he did not act immediately and requested reinforcements. Peter was assumed that David might be armed as they prepared to take action. A taxi arrived in the driveway, and David quickly escaped when the taxi sped off. The police chased him and eventually arrested him, pointing a gun at him. David surrendered without incident. What the police did not know was that this was just the tip of the iceberg. David was arrested, and his fingerprints were taken. Searching them in an international database revealed another twist to an already tangled plot. The fingerprints were identified as belonging to a man named Albert Johnson Walker, who was ranked number 4 on Interpol's wanted list and was Canada's most wanted fugitive. Albert's story starts in Canada, 6 years before Ronald's body was found in the Atlantic Ocean. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, on August 9, 1945, Albert always had big dreams. Although he dropped out of high school, but he worked as a bank teller and spent much of his free time socializing in Ontario. It was at a social event that he met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. Albert proposed to Barbara after just a 4-day romance, and they got married in 1968. They quickly began their family, having 3 daughters and 4 sons, and raised them in Paris, Ontario. After years of assisting others with financial solutions, Albert, along with Barbara, launched a freelance bookkeeping business. The business flourished, and within a decade, it grew to 6 branches with over 30 employees. Friends were eager to invest with them, but Albert was secretly diverting their money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Eventually, problems began to surface. Albert's marriage ended due to his numerous affairs. The people he swindled money from began to get suspicious, so in 1990 Walker decided to leave before the situation became more tense. He told friends he was taking their 15-year-old daughter, Sheena, on a skiing trip to Europe, and used this as a cover to escape. Barbara realized what was happening and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her as a missing person. The police tried to chase him, but they lost track of him in London. He assumed a new identity, taken from a client, and started going by David Wallace Davis, while Sheena was renamed Noel. Although he managed to evade the authorities, the name David Davis was still linked to his true identity. He needed a new identity, and he had the perfect opportunity when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a very small circle of friends and was obsessed with living in Canada. Albert took advantage of this information. Everything was set in motion and Albert finally got the identity he needed. However, the plans fell apart when Ronald contacted Albert in 1995. Life in Canada wasn't as he had imagined it. Ronald informed Albert that he would return to Essex to settle near David. The solid foundation Albert was building started to show signs of trouble. Having 2 individuals named Ronald Platt in the same area with identical birth details was problematic for Albert. So, he devised a plan. He bought a yacht called Lady Jane and took his family and Ronald to Totnes in Devon to celebrate its launch. During the visit, they bought a new 10-pound anchor, which later turned out to be crucial evidence in an investigation. After returning to Essex, Albert invited Ronald back to Devon for another weekend, just two friends enjoying the coast and fishing. Albert sailed the Lady Jane out into open waters, far from the view of anyone on shore. He then struck Ronald on the head with the anchor, rendering him unconscious. Albert searched Ronald's pockets to remove any identification, secured the anchor to Ronald's belt, and threw him overboard. Albert believes it was the perfect murder. However, Albert made one critical mistake. He forgot to remove Ronald's Rolex watch, which eventually unveiled the meticulously planned crime. Albert's trial began in 1998, with evidence presented in court, including the anchor found entangled with Ronald's body in a net. Forensic experts determined that the head injury matched the shape of the anchor. Traces of zinc were found on the pants belt Ronald's, matching the zinc on the anchor. Albert had used the anchor to weigh Ronald down by attaching it to his belt. Further investigation of the Lady Jane revealed more evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were discovered on a yacht cushion, and his fingerprint was found on the carrier bag used to transport the anchor back to the Lady Jane. Blood stains were discovered near the railway tracks at Albert's residence. The habit of accumulating documents harmed him, as they were confiscated and used to demonstrate his fraudulent businesses and deceitful activities. However, it was the testimonies of Elaine and Sheena that ultimately condemned him. Elaine's testimony demonstrated to the court that Albert stood to lose significantly if Ronald returned to England. Sheena dealt the decisive blow. She could not provide a clear alibi for Albert on the weekend of the murder. She stated that he had been on the yacht and appeared disheveled and agitated when he returned late on the murder day. Sheena's testimony marked a new phase in the investigation. She spoke in court about her life of fear with her father, his charm, and how she felt like a victim, just like anyone else who encountered him. When Albert took the stand, he appeared very charming and confident in court. He claimed that Sheena insisted on joining him and conceded to committing fraud and other illegal activities, but he firmly denied murdering Ronald. He explained that the blood found on the yacht was because Ronald had accidentally hit his head while they were fishing. Nevertheless, the jury quickly saw through his falsehoods and convicted him after only 2 hours of deliberation. High Court Justice Neil Butterfield addressed Albert, stating that the murder was carefully planned and executed with chilling efficiency. Justice Butterfield said that Albert was a plausible, intelligent, and ruthless man who posed a serious threat to anyone who stood in his way. Albert Johnson Walker was sentenced to 15 years to life in 2005 and was allowed to return to Canada to serve his sentence in 2007. At the age of 61, he was sentenced to 4 more years in prison to run concurrently with his sentence. In 2015, Albert applied for parole but withdrew his application at the last moment. Now, at age 75, the Canadian Parole Board has denied his application for day and full parole. His request to travel unaccompanied to Vancouver Island for a personal development program was also denied. It seems likely he will never be released. Albert seems to have accomplished the perfect crime. But then karma caused him to be exposed. If it weren't for Ronald Platt's real Rolex watch and a series of coincidences, he probably would have escaped legal punishment. The case of Lauren Hugelmayer. Raleigh, a rapidly growing city in northeastern North Carolina, is known for its rich history and beautiful oak trees. However, on September 1st, 2017, a horrific crime rocked the city. That morning, at approximately 1 a.m., the Raleigh Police Department's 911 dispatch center received a call from 28-year-old Matthew Phelps. Phelps was distraught and said he had accidentally stabbed his wife, Lauren, to death while he was dreaming. He then suddenly woke up to find his wife lying in a pool of blood on the floor. "I took too much cough medicine and it affected me," Matthew explained to the operator, saying that it could cause a cold, but it made him feel better. He admitted that he had been unable to sleep at night. The operator asked Matthew to check on his wife, asking if she was breathing and if there was any visible movement in her chest. Matthew replied, No, she didn't move. Then he noticed the blood on him and said it was dry, not wet. During the conversation, Matthew finally revealed the reason behind his strange behavior and revealed the events that led up to the incident. Patrol officers from the Raleigh Police Department arrived at Matthew's home on Patuxent Street. Upon entering the home, they found Lauren, 29, lying motionless on the floor, a bloody knife on the bed, and cough drops on the bathroom counter. Despite showing no signs of life, Lauren was taken to the hospital by paramedics, where she was pronounced dead. The investigation into Lauren's death led police to have conflicting theories about whether it was an accident or a targeted murder, after which they brought Matthew in for further questioning. An autopsy revealed the horrific extent of Lauren's injuries, with 123 stab wounds, including 44 to the face and the rest to the head, neck, and arms. The couple's social media profiles, which contain hundreds of photos, show a happy relationship. Matthew has a clean record, and from the outside, they appear to be a happy, carefree couple. However, it cannot be ruled out that Matthew's actions were influenced by a large dose of cough syrup. Can cause euphoria, delusions, and often make people act strangely. To unravel the mystery behind the murder, police dug into the couple's past. Lauren Hugelmayer was born on June 9, 1988, in Los Angeles County to a deeply religious family. Lauren had a normal childhood with her two older sisters, Beth and Brianna. Lauren graduated from Swain County High School in North Carolina in 2007. She went on to earn a degree in business administration and management from Appalachian State University in 2011. After completing her studies, she worked as an auditor at Quintiles. She also started a side business selling Scentsy products. She was very passionate about Scentsy, and her Facebook page was filled with photos and videos of her side business, including trips she took with other Scentsy sellers. Lauren was a member of Hope Lutheran Church, where she was a Sunday school teacher and taught children and youth at the church. In her mid-20s, Lauren reconnected with Matthew Phelps, a classmate of hers from high school. Lauren and Matthew initially lost touch after high school when he transferred schools, and Lauren's family moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. Notably, their childhood experiences were very different. While Lauren grew up in a loving family, Matthew was not so fortunate. Matthew's parents abandoned him at birth, leaving him to live with his grandparents from a young age. Matthew's parents divorced shortly after he was born. His biological father was not interested in him, and his mother remarried several times but never gave Matthew a family or a lasting relationship with any stepfather. Matthew grew up without parents, and despite his grandparents' best efforts to love and care for him, he felt a deep emotional void. This could have led to behavioral problems from an early age. He began hanging out with bad friends and developed a habit of abusing drugs and alcohol during his high school years. Matthew and his friends were known to regularly use quercetin, the same drug he claimed to have taken before attacking his wife. Of course, high doses do not cause a high, but Matthew and his friends took advantage of it anyway. Because of his addiction, Matthew's grandparents were forced to withdraw him from public high school and enroll him in a private Christian academy. This was successful, and Matthew improved significantly, earning better grades and eventually graduating. He then attended Clear Creek Baptist Bible College in Pineville, Kentucky, and graduated in 2011. Matthew was the one who came across Lauren's photo and realized they knew each other. After some hesitation, Matthew contacted Lauren through Instagram, liking every photo she posted. The two began talking, and their text messages quickly turned into long, late-night phone calls. Before long, both Matthew and Lauren were falling for each other. The two began a long-distance relationship, as Matthew was still living in Kentucky at the time. Despite living hundreds of miles apart, their relationship began to develop quickly. After a while, Matthew tried to visit Lauren and eventually moved to North Carolina to be with her. Since Lauren was very close to her family, she was happy to introduce Matthew to them. Most of her family members welcomed him, trusting Lauren's choice. They saw him as a kind man who truly cared about their daughter. Lauren's mother, Lori, thought Matthew was the right person for Lauren. However, Lauren's father, Dale, had reservations about the relationship. His concerns may have stemmed from his protective fatherly instincts, or perhaps it was intuition. In Dale's opinion, Matthew was moving too fast and that he was likely hiding a secret from Lauren. Despite his suspicions, Dale could not pinpoint exactly what made him feel uncomfortable about Matthew. However, he chose to put his feelings aside because his daughter seemed genuinely happy. Eventually, Matthew became a part of the family. However, during a night out at Lauren's parents' house, he revealed a shocking secret. He had been in a failed marriage before he dated Lauren, but refused to share any other details. This confession raised concerns about his honesty and intentions, especially given his young age at the time of the divorce and the fact that he had kept it from Lauren for months. Lauren's family were particularly concerned and they noticed his body language seemed suspicious. Despite their reservations, Lauren's love for Matthew remained unwavering, and her family chose to support the couple as they continued their relationship. Matthew and Lauren eventually got engaged in 2015. The engagement party left a lasting impression on family and friends. Matthew's mother had a strained relationship with Lauren, which was evident when she wore a white dress to the wedding to show her disapproval. Despite this, the event was a success and the couple married the following year. The couple were avid Star Wars fans, and they incorporated this theme into their wedding. With their love for each other and their new life together, Lauren and Matthew seemed to be very happy. For Lauren, married life exceeded her expectations. She had her own home, a fulfilling job, and a loving husband who made her smile every day. However, the dream marriage soon turned into an ugly reality when Matthew began to show his true colors. Just a few months after their marriage, Matthew had difficulty finding a job, and when he did find one, he quickly left without much explanation. During his unemployment, Matthew spent most of his time playing video games. Meanwhile, Lauren worked multiple jobs to support the family. This created significant financial stress, which was exacerbated by Matthew's overspending on expensive electronics and gaming equipment. Lauren had saved about $10,000, but Matthew spent it all very quickly, spending $1,200 on iTunes and Xbox subscriptions alone. He even stole money from Lauren's purse if she refused to pay for his lavish lifestyle. Lauren had a decent amount of savings in her bank account before she married Matthew. However, by the time she died, there was only $1,000 left. In addition to Matthew's spending habits, there were other problems in the relationship. Lauren also had problems with Matthew's family. During a visit to his family home 6 months after the wedding, his mother was cold to Lauren and the couple argued the entire time. As a result, Lauren felt unwelcome and isolated. The disagreements mainly revolved around Matthew's spending habits, which hindered their ability to pursue their shared goals and dreams. As mentioned earlier, the couple was very fond of Star Wars and were trying to save money to take a trip to Disney World. However, Matthew would spend the little money they had saved on his own selfish habits. And Lauren suspected that Matthew was having an affair with their neighbor, with whom he frequently socialized. One evening, while Lauren was cooking dinner and talking to her sister Beth on the phone, Matthew came home from work, but instead of going with Lauren, he went out with his neighbor. He then sent Lauren a text saying he was having a great time eating with his neighbors and told her to go out to dinner alone, which further raised her suspicions. Although Matthew spent a lot of time with their neighbor, he was extremely possessive of Lauren. His possessiveness led to frequent arguments over a man at church whom Matthew suspected of flirting with Lauren. Matthew's suspicions of Lauren only increased the distance between them. He often used his past experience of being dumped by his ex-wife, who had met another man on a mission trip to justify his insecurities. However, this justification did nothing to help their relationship, which was deteriorating. Lauren had confided in loved ones about her desire to leave Matthew less than a year after they were married because of his controlling nature. However, driven by her faith, Lauren was determined to make their marriage work and put thoughts of divorce aside. As a result, she continued to project a vision of a perfect marriage on social media, posting pictures and videos of the couple with affectionate captions that were in stark contrast to the reality of their troubled marriage. Matthew decided to return to college to become a pastor, hoping that this would save his marriage. However, his wife Lauren was not impressed and was fed up with his thoughtless and immature behavior. Lauren eventually decided to leave Matthew. But she would never get the chance to carry out that decision. Instead, she was brutally murdered by her husband in their bed. The investigation quickly pieced together the events. The crime scene appeared to be staged. The knife and cough syrup were carefully placed, and Matthew had only a small amount of blood on him, mostly on his shoes and a few drops on his shirt. This contrasted with the brutal nature of the crime, in which Lauren had been stabbed 123 times. The lack of blood splatter suggested that Matthew had washed himself, which disproved his claim that he was in a delusional state at the time of the murder. Traces of blood were found throughout the apartment after a luminol test, suggesting it had been cleaned up before police arrived. Matthew was notably expressionless when police encountered him at the scene of the crime. Cough syrup manufacturer Bayer later issued a statement denying any link between the syrup and the violent behavior. A medical examination found that the amount of the drug in Matthew's system at the time of the murder was minimal, making it unlikely to have influenced his actions. Despite this, Matthew maintained that the cough syrup was the cause, prompting police to continue searching for further evidence. The investigation into Matthew's motives led police to his diary, in which he detailed his relationship problems with Lauren, expressing low self-esteem and insecurity due to feeling unwelcome by her family. Despite Lauren's best efforts, Matthew never felt like he fit in well with her family. The neighbor Lauren suspected was related to Matthew, told police that they were just friends and had grown close through conversations about anxiety and depression. She also shared that, as they spent more time together, Matthew began discussing darker topics such as suicide and death, perhaps planning to take the licensed gun he knew she had in the house. Further investigation of Matthew's phone revealed a suspicious online search history. The searches included queries about the intoxicating effects of cough syrup, such as its ability to cause a foggy feeling and whether other people had ever been high. These searches alone suggested that Matthew may have planned the crime in advance and considered using cough syrup as a defense strategy. While this evidence was circumstantial and not enough to build a solid case, the discovery of a secret Instagram account, at Marty_Radical, where Matthew posted dark content inspired by a movie, provided another important piece of evidence. Evidence showed that Matthew had a fascination with serial killers. This was evident in his portrayal of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho and his apparent interest in understanding what it was like to take another person's life, which he shared with a friend. Before killing Lauren, Matthew posted a photo on Instagram with the statement, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer," and the hashtag, "Found an angel to kill." His Instagram account frequently referenced demons and evil. When the trial began, prosecutors felt they had enough evidence to prove that Matthew had intentionally killed Lauren. However, the defense argued that this action was out of character for Matthew and attributed his behavior to his unstable and depressed mental state at the time. To support this claim, they presented several letters from Matthew's co-workers to the judge, asserting that this was out of character for Matthew. The prosecution called Matthew's ex-wife to testify, contesting his earlier claims that she had cheated on him. Instead, she claimed that Matthew had been unfaithful throughout their marriage. Their marriage, which suffered from similar problems to his marriage to Lauren, included his refusal to work, overspending, and not contributing to their shared goals. These problems eventually led to their separation. Matthew ultimately accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, a felony punishable by death or life in prison without parole, to avoid the death penalty. When asked to confirm his understanding of the plea, Matthew replied, "Yes, sir." He also admitted to stabbing his wife, Lauren Hugelmeyer, multiple times. On October 5, 2018, the case against Matthew Phelps came to an end when he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At his sentencing, Matthew addressed Lauren's family and apologized, saying that he deeply regretted taking Lauren's life, which he admitted had deeply affected many people. Lauren's family did not accept Matthew's apology, finding it hollow and insincere. In response, a family member expressed anger and hatred towards Matthew, stating that they could never forgive him for his insensitive actions. To this day, Lauren's family still feels guilty for not intervening when they knew the relationship had taken a turn for the worse. To help others like their beloved Lauren, they founded an organization called Lauren's Light, which raises awareness about abusive relationships and domestic violence.